Welcome to Got Your Fan Fiction. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Naruto started his own Jinchuriki family? If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Tonight, the land of Fire's woodland did not feel like home. It had the atmosphere of a tomb. The moon created long, skeleton shadows on the wet ground, hanging in the inked black sky like a jagged piece of bone. Every snap of a twig was an impending heart attack, and every rustle of leaves seemed like a whispered judgment. Naruto Uzumaki sat huddled at the base of a gnarled oak tree, his breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches. His once bright orange jumpsuit had turned into a drab, mocking rust in the moonlight, and it was covered in muck and pine needles. The forbidden scroll of seals rested in his lap. It smelled of ozone and old parchment, was heavy, and was colder than it should have been. Naruto had been devoting all of his ravenous, frantic energy on the first technique for the past few hours. His brain was pounding from trying to shape chakra, which had always felt like a wild, restless animal inside his stomach, and his fingers were raw from tracing the ink. He was grinning, though. He was hiding the reality that he was drowning with that big, desperate smile. One more hour, he thought, fatigue clouding his eyes. Iruka-sensei will see if I can get this down pat. Everyone will see. I will no longer be the dead last person. I refuse to be the boy who sleeps with old milk in an empty apartment. I'm going to be a ninja. He desired to be desired. More than any missed meal, it was a basic, primal hunger that tore at his ribcage. Naruto, I found you. The enthusiasm of a teacher who had finally apprehended a naughty student was absent from the voice. It was chilly. It was clinical. Naruto's head jerked up. The scroll fell from his knees into the mud as he rushed to his feet. Iruka-sensei. You discovered me. To be the Naruto they anticipated, he made an effort to speak loudly and enthusiastically. I succeeded. I picked up a method. I've been training all night, and although it was somewhat challenging, I succeeded. I can pass now, right? I can now truly be a ninja. Iruka's shadow made a dark, jagged line against the moon when he landed on a low-lying branch. He refrained from giving Naruto a head pat. He was not grinning. His hands were balled into fists so tightly that they resembled white stones in the gloom, and his shoulders were stiff. A ghost of the man who had purchased Naruto ramen just 2 nights prior briefly appeared in Iruka's eyes. Then the shadows changed, though. With a crazy, jagged smile that split his face, Mizuki emerged from behind a thick cedar. The steel of the enormous, 4-pointed shuriken he carried on his back gleamed maliciously in the moonlight. Oh, Naruto, he sees you, Mizuki laughed. It sounded like the skittering of dry leaves across a grave. After 12 years, he sees exactly what everyone else in this community has been witnessing. The liar is visible to him. He spots the robber. He witnesses the plague. Stop talking, Mizuki. Iruka let out a shout, but it lacked the authority of a teacher. It was the cry of a man attempting to contain a boiling kettle of trauma. Iruka, why keep the secret? Mizuki's voice became an oily, bitter whisper. His criminality has already been established. The most valuable item in the village was taken by him. Why don't you explain to him why he is such a skilled monster? Naruto's heart stuttered nervously and frantically as he glanced between them. Sensei. What is he discussing? I only took it because Mizuki instructed me to. I knew you were desperate, so I told you. With a predatory spark in his eyes, Mizuki let out a yell. And, Naruto, aren't you desperate? Are you desperate to find out why the parents in this community take their kids away from you? Are you desperate to understand why the third Hokage observes you with sympathy rather than pride? Iruka shouted out, Mizuki, don't. But he made no attempt to stop him. He remained immobile on that branch. Naruto, it's due to the decree. Everyone knows the secret, but you don't. Mizuki took a step nearer and gestured to the boy's chest with a gloved finger. The 9-tailed fox was not killed by the 4th Hokage 12 years ago. He was unable to. He then sealed it. He imprisoned the monster inside a newborn's body. Naruto's breath caught. He felt as though he was breathing in silt as the forest's air suddenly became dense. You are the 9-tailed fox, Naruto. Mizuki's chuckle resembled a broken piece of glass. It's breathing through your lungs, the beast that decimated this village and made our streets into a slaughterhouse. You're not a boy, you're a nightmare's cage. The world broke apart, not just stopped. With wide, glazed eyes, Naruto gazed at Iruka, begging for a denial that would never come. Sensei, inform him that he is lying. Tell me he's simply trying to con me once more, please. Iruka took a while to respond. The Iruka-sensei. Mask, the ramen dates, the kind corrections, and years of hard-won empathy vanished in the heat of a rising, ancient pain as he gazed down at the youngster. Iruka was no longer a teacher. Standing among the debris of his house, he was once again a youngster, inhaling the iron taste of his parents' blood and the scent of charred wood. Like a tidal wave, the trauma he had buried beneath layers of professional obligation came back, drowning the man and leaving just the bereaved orphan. Iruka muttered, "I tried." His voice sounded hollow, brittle, and tremulous. "I tried to be the man the third wanted me to be, Naruto. I swear to the gods. I attempted to perceive you as a pupil." With a terrible, deep-seated hatred, he drew a kunai slowly, his hand trembling. He turned to face Naruto, but he failed to notice the 12-year-old. He saw a demon's red-slit pupils. He witnessed his mother's death by fire. Iruka spat, "But every time I look at you, I remember that night," her words brimming with passionate resentment. "I can still smell the smoke. I recall being by myself in a village that had no idea how to handle a broken youngster. It simply hurts too much to gaze at you." Naruto was more affected by the rejection than by any bodily harm. It twisted in the wound of 12 years of seclusion like a knife to the soul. His broad, optimistic smile not only dimmed but vanished. "No," whispered Naruto. His sandals slipped in the dirt as he retreated. With his fingernails burrowing into his scalp, he grabbed his skull as though he might extract the secret from his mind. "No, no, no, my name is Naruto. I'm just me, not a fox." A raw, guttural sob tore from his throat as he fell into the mud. It was a complete mental breakdown, a disintegration of the brittle ego he had developed in order to exist. Every "I hate you" he had ever seen in the eyes of the peasants, every cold shoulder from a merchant, and every bitter stare from a bystander finally made sense. His practical jokes did not make them despise him. They detested him just for being alive. "Observe him." Sensing his opening, Mizuki chuckled. With the metal ringing as it slid from the leather straps, he reached for the enormous shuriken on his back. "He's broken. Iruka, if you won't put the beast down and be a hero, I will." With a deadly, high-pitched hum, the enormous shuriken spun as Mizuki attacked. Something awoke in the old, ironclad rooms of Naruto's blood deep under the panic. The fox wasn't the one. The Uzumaki was the one. The village's familiar, Naruto, the loud-mouthed, blonde prankster, simply vanished when the trauma reached a critical mass. In the abrupt, unnerving quiet of the clearing, his heart began to beat like a battle drum against his ribs. At the base of his spine, a thick, oppressive chakra pressure ignited, causing an excruciating heat that poured into his veins like molten lead. Clang. It sounded like the underwater tolling of a temple bell. Naruto's back exploded into 4 shimmering, golden chains that tore apart his garment and flailed madly in the air like injured, celestial creatures. Not only did Mizuki's enormous shuriken strike them, but it broke into 1,000 iron splinters when the metal dissolved in the face of the golden chakra's extreme intensity. Naruto got to his feet, but his movements were jerky and rigid, like a puppet being dragged by divine, unseen strings. His hair was bleeding away from its typical sun-bleached blonde color. It turned a rich, vibrant blood red, the color of a fading star, the color of a maelstrom, beginning at the roots. It wasn't a cool power-up. It was a tangible expression of a bloodline awakening to protect a broken mind. Mizuki scurried backward in the muck, a lizard brain panic completely taking the place of his bravado. "What are you? Stay back, could it be the fox?" His fingers fumbled with the signs as he threw his palms together in a panic. Wind style, gale palm. With the intention of tearing the youngster to bits, a focused jet of air ripped through the clearing. However, the shackles remained still. Like a fly being brushed away, they whipped into the air and literally swatted the wind away. With a startling whip crack speed, one chain whipped forward. The steel snapped like dried noodles and twisted firmly around the man's throat as it easily crushed through Mizuki's raised defensive kunai. With his boots kicking futilely in the dirt, Mizuki was lifted 5 feet into the air. Naruto observed him. His blue eyes had faded. They were vast, glassy pools of molten gold, utterly devoid of any humanity, anger, or hate. All that was present was a cold, complete numbness. "Hold on!" Iruka yelled. "Naruto, stop!" and let go of his kunai. Iruka had finally overcome his own trauma after witnessing the boy's agony and the monster Mizuki had turned into because of greed. "I didn't mean it, please. I was in pain." Naruto carefully turned his head. The tilt was bird-like and mechanical. The earth beneath the chains cracked as they vibrated with a loud, guttural murmur. Naruto said. You were in pain? His voice had layers. A child's harmonic resonance mixed with something older and colder. For 12 years, I've been in pain. It only took a minute for you to sense it. The golden bond became more rigid. There was a muffled, horrible crunch. The frenetic kicking subsided, then came to a complete halt. With a metallic hiss, the chain unraveled, releasing Mizuki's corpse into the ground like an abandoned toy. Naruto avoided looking at the corpse. He didn't look at the forbidden scroll lying in the mud, a treasure that had cost him his world. The power of the town was not what he desired. Their legacy was not what he desired. He moved away from Iruka and into the forest's deeper shadows. Wait, Naruto. With his hand out, Iruka scurried over to him. We are able to resolve this. The Hokage, he. Without turning around, the boy declared, there is no Naruto anymore. The chains vanished into a shower of golden sparks with a sharp crack of chakra. The boy with the red hair disappeared into the early morning's gray mist. Iruka dropped on his knees in the mud and reached for the emptiness of the mist with a shaking palm. He realized with a painful, soul-crushing finality that he had finally succeeded as he stood there in a solitary woodland, a broken man. Naruto was as alone as he was because of him. A small, old ship was getting ready to depart the docks far to the east, beyond the boundaries of the Land of Fire. It was on its way to the Land of Water, a place of blood, mist, and people uninterested in the stories of the hidden leaf. With his new red hair blowing in the sea breeze, Naruto stood on the edge of the cliff. He didn't turn to face the trees. He did not turn to see the faces of the guys who had let him down on the mountain. He fell into the unknown after stepping off the edge. It didn't feel like death to fall. It was similar to shedding. The spirits of the hidden leaf were engulfed by the raging wind as Naruto descended the rock. The final invisible ties that bound him to the community were ripped away as the breeze tore at his clothing. He wasn't a demon, a failure, or a ninja for a brief moment of weightless free fall. Gravity drove him toward the churning black maw of the sea, and he was only a boy in a rusted orange jumpsuit, his new blood-red hair blowing furiously. He shut his eyes. He released his grip. It had a profound effect. Instead of welcoming him, the ocean crashed into him like a wall of icy stone. The frigid, crushing pressure of the deep quickly replaced the breath that had been forcefully punched from his lungs. He started to sink. In the ink-black water, his red hair floated upward like a cloud of blood. The shock of the cold had immobilized his limbs, leaving them totally numb. His mind was curiously, terrifyingly silent as his lungs pleaded for air and a primordial panic kicked in. A hollow voice said, "It's okay," as his consciousness faded. "I don't have to smile anymore. I can just rest." The glow on the surface dimmed to nothing. He was taken by the darkness. Giving up already? The voice was not audible through the waves. The silence was dispelled by a deep, seismic rumble that vibrated right into the marrow of his bones. Naruto's eyes snapped open. The frigid ocean was no longer drowning him. He stood ankle-deep in sluggish, filthy water that smelled of dried blood and old rust. The roof of corroded pipes that dripped a slow, repetitive plink-plink into the darkness had taken the place of the infinite sea. The gate loomed before him, its enormous iron-wrought bars vanishing into the darkness overhead. A mass of dark orange fur moved behind the cage. One enormous eye opened. The iris was a vertical obsidian slit surrounded by a sea of fiery, evil red. "Go ahead," snarled the nine tails. Naruto was overcome by a wave of oppressive, humid heat caused by its breath. Sink. Drown. Let the salt fill your lungs. If your heart stops beating, this wretched seal breaks. I will simply scatter to the winds and reform in a few years, completely free. You'll just be a nameless skeleton rotting at the bottom of the ocean. Naruto raised his gaze to the enormous eye. He refrained from screaming. He didn't ask for rent. Back in the Land of Fire, the youngster who would have screamed at the monster lay dead in the mud. "Then let it happen," Naruto said. His voice sounded lifeless and lifeless. "I'm done." For a long, somber moment, the fox gazed at him. Then it started to make a deep rumbling noise in its chest. Boulders crushing against one another was the sound. It was amusing. With a terrible, cruel glee, the beast narrowed its slit pupil as it leaned its enormous snout on the iron bars. The fox purred, its voice full of sadistic glee. "You truly are entirely broken. 12 years of watching you play the fool, grinning like an idiot while those insects spat on you. It was nauseating," it said. "But tonight..." Out of the shadows came a huge, clawed hand that gripped the cage's bars so tightly that the iron creaked. "Tonight was different. Watching you finally shatter. Watching you sprout those Uzumaki chains and crush that man's throat like a dry twig. That was exquisite. The fox's eye was twisted with glee. The sound of his cartilage snapping, the look of terror in his eyes when he realized the good little boy was gone. I enjoyed his silence almost as much as you did. You finally stopped acting like a victim and started acting like a monster. One enormous claw's tip moved between the bars and hovered inches from Naruto's chest. It emitted a searing, greasy heat. I don't care if you die, brat. I welcome it, the Nine-Tails scoffed. But it would be a tragic waste to let you rot now, just when your heart has finally turned black. I want to see what else you can break. Wake up. The fox didn't inquire. It pushed. The claw unleashed a fierce, searing burst of red energy that struck Naruto squarely in the chest. A heart that had wished to stop was violated by the forced jump start. Underwater, Naruto's eyes jerked open. A burning, internal inferno that made his veins feel like they were pumping molten lead destroyed the chilly numbing. His limbs were taken over by the fox's malice and his own hidden survival instinct. His body kicked ferociously, clawing through the dark water for the slight glitter of the surface, even though he didn't want to fight. With a ragged, frantic gasp, he broke the surface and coughed up a lungful of stinging salt water. Cutting over the swells, the enormous, barnacle-encrusted hull of a ship loomed out of the fog above him. On the deck, men were yelling, their voices muted by the roaring waves. Over the port side, I saw something. Splash. A few feet from him, a bulky, coarse hemp net struck the water and bobbed on the icy waves. The rough hemp rose and fell inches from his face as the net swayed on the frigid surf. It served as a lifeline. A link to the real world. He only needed to raise his arm, which was heavy with water, wrap his rough fingers around the ropes, and pull. He didn't. Naruto's body rose and fell in time with the fierce beat of the waves, his arms dangling limply at his sides. His heart had been jump-started by the fox's blazing chakra, forcing his lungs to take a breath, but he was unconcerned. His sunken, golden eyes stung from the sea spray as he gazed blankly up at the ship's wooden hull. He had no emotion. Not in a desperate situation. No thanks. Just the complete, numbing tiredness of a boy who had passed away in the jungle just hours before. The world would have to drag him if it really wanted him back. A voice from the deck above yelled, "He ain't moving. I think he's a goner." But the howling wind muted it. "Use the hook, you idiot. Don't let him slip under the hull." Beside him, a long gaff hook with an iron point dove into the sea. For a few moments, the sailor blindfished in the dark before the rusted iron snagged on Naruto's damaged orange jacket's thick, wet collar. The slack was pulled taut with a forceful, abrupt jerk that almost dislocated Naruto's shoulder. He didn't scream. He did not assist them. Like a dead shark, he was dragged up the ship's sheer, barnacle-crusted side. His shins and knees sustained shallow, bleeding cuts from the sharp shells slicing through the thin fabric of his pants, but the pain was hardly noticeable through the dense mist of his indifference. He was heaved over the railing by powerful, calloused hands that seized him by the back of his belt and the scruff of his jacket. With a heavy, wet thud, Naruto struck the deck. Stale seawater, fish oil, and brine made the wood slippery. He just lay on his stomach for a bit, coughing up a mouthful of stinging salt water as his cheek pushed against the icy, shattered wood. "Gods above, it's just a kid," said a rough voice. He was surrounded by heavy, salt-stained boots. "Look at the state of him. Clothes are ripped to shreds, and bright orange. Who wears orange out on the water? He must be a shipwreck from one of those fancy merchant galleons. Turn him over. Check if he's breathing." He was flipped onto his back after a boot gave him a hard shove to the ribs. Naruto's face was covered in harsh, fluctuating shadows as the lantern light swung overhead. The three rugged-looking sailors who made up the crew leaned forward, their cheeks worn from years of tough living in the land of water and bitter storms. One of them, a man with half an ear missing, winced a little. The man muttered, "Look at his hair," with a hint of superstition in his voice. "Red as a fresh gut wound. I ain't never seen hair that color naturally. Not outside the old stories, anyway." Another said, "And the scars on his cheeks," making a fishing knife handle gesture. "Looks like whiskers. What kind of freak did we pull out of the deep?" Naruto remained motionless. He gazed up at the lantern, which was wavering. The deep, jagged whisker scars that had darkened as the chains erupted were traced by the cold, biting drops of rain that had begun to fall, washing the salt off his face. The biggest man, who appeared to be the captain based on his bulky coat, squatted next to him and said, "Hey, you hear me, brat?" In an attempt to elicit a response, he stretched out and gave Naruto a cheek smack. "You deaf? Where's your ship?" Naruto turned his head slowly. The captain's breath caught when he saw the lantern light, and his hand automatically fell to the rusted cutlass hilt at his waist. The boy's eyes were devoid of humanity, white and blue. There were only two large, unfathomable pools of molten gold, gazing through the captain as though he were a ghost. It bore the appearance of an apex predator uninterested in its victim. "I don't have a ship," Naruto declared. His voice had lost all of its previous volume and was now a faint, rasping sound. A slight echo of the enormous beast imprisoned in the corroded cage of his mind was borne by it, a strange, harmonious echo. The seamen looked at one another nervously. The child was surrounded by a heavy, suffocating atmosphere that reminded him of the instant before a lightning strike. The captain took a slow, deliberate step back and swallowed deeply. The captain gave the command, "Get him below deck," in a more firm tone. "Throw him in the holding cell next to the cargo. If he survives the night, we'll sell him to the brokers in the mist. Red hair or not, a strong back is a strong back." Naruto was pulled to his feet by two of the men who seized him by the arms. He had no trouble. They dragged him toward the wide, black hatch leading into the ship's bowels, and he allowed his feet to slide across the damp deck. Naruto did not turn to face the sky as the blackness of the grip engulfed him. He was glad of the darkness. It was very much like home. At last, the ship's tremendous rocking ceased, and the slow, repetitive thud of the ship grinding into a wooden pier took its place. The bright, golden sun of the Leaf Village was not the light that filled the hold when the massive iron grate above him was eventually flung wide. It was the gray of the land of water, sickening and wounded. Heavy salt, decomposing fish, and a subtle metallic tang of copper were all there in the rushing air. Naruto did not cover his eyes. His bare feet dragged against the fractured rungs as he allowed the men to drag him up the wooden ladder by the scruff of his tattered jacket. He was thrown onto the docks, which were choked with fog. The port was a vast, rusting shantytown made of thick iron chains and moist stone. With their shoulders slumped against the constant drizzle and their gaze downcast, men and women glided through the mist like ghosts. Here, nobody was dressed in vivid hues. In a city full of predators, his torn orange jumpsuit was a lighthouse of stupidity. The captain said, "Here's the broker," and pushed Naruto ahead. A man built like a boulder stood behind a pile of wet containers, waiting for them. His arms were covered in thick, filthy bandages, and he was wearing a heavy leather apron coated with dried, old blood. He appeared more like a butcher assessing a slab of meat than a businessman. His gaze swept over Naruto's petite form as he chewed on a wooden toothpick. The broker's voice sounded like two grinding stones as he rasped, "This is the salvage." With a hand as rough as a rasp, he moved forward and grabbed Naruto by the chin. He pulled the boy's head back and forth, examining the matted, blood-red hair and the deep, whisker-like scars on his cheeks. "He's small. Built too lean. I need functional strength for the pits, not starving runts. He'll get snapped in half in the first bout." The captain growled, "Look closer, Rudo," eager to get his coin. "He ain't just a runt. We pulled him out of the deep ocean, freezing cold, and he didn't even shiver. He's got dense muscle under that dirt. Coiled up tight, and look at the eyes." Rudo bent closer. Naruto returned the stare. The slit pupil, golden gaze remained fixed. There was no dread, no begging, no glimmer of naive optimism. The enormous broker's thick fingers twitched at the utterly vacuous, dead-end stare. Rudo murmured, freakish, and eventually let go of his hand. As though he would be affected by Naruto's indifference, he wiped it on his apron. "Fine. I'll give you 30 ryo for him. Throw him in the lowest pens. If he's as tough as you say, the other dogs in the dark will test him before the crowd even gets a look." The captain's chest was struck by a bulky canvas bag of coins. The deal was completed. The fourth Hokage's legacy, Naruto Uzumaki, had just been sold for the price of a cheap iron anvil. Grabbing Naruto by the collar, Rudo pulled him away from the docks and down a set of slippery, moss-covered stone steps that led far below the surface. The air grew hotter the farther they descended. The oppressive smell of perspiration, pee, and raw, rusty iron took the place of the ocean's scent. Naruto could hear it through the thick stone walls, the muffled, animalistic roaring of a throng followed by the dull, moist sound of flesh hitting flesh. It was a subterranean amphitheater, a slaughterhouse for amusement. At the end of a corridor lit by torches, they came to a massive iron door. Rudo simply kicked open a smaller grate at the bottom without bothering to unlock it. From a hook on the wall, he reached for a thick, rudimentary iron collar and violently buckled it around Naruto's neck. The metal was heavy and rough, and it was chilling. Rudo growled, "Welcome to the Underbloods," read, and pushed Naruto in the direction of the shadowy entrance. "You fight when the bell rings. You eat if you win. You die if you lose. Don't bother screaming. It just makes the others want to bleed you faster." Rudo shoved Naruto while planting a hefty boot in the center of his back. With his bare feet striking a floor composed of packed mud and dried blood, Naruto staggered forward into the completely dark cage. With a harsh, echoing finality, the iron grate behind him slammed shut. The lock made a click. The shadows surrounding Naruto started to shift as his golden eyes adapted to the darkness. No beds were present. No benches. Just the labored breathing of a dozen other fighters, broken men, scarred mercenaries, and savage teenagers, trapped in the darkness. A handful of them slowly pushed away from the wet stone walls, staring at the fresh, vividly colored meat that had just been thrown into their cage. From the rear of the cell came a low, predatory laugh. Naruto did not retreat from the bars. He stood in the middle of the room, motionless. His neck ached from the heavy iron collar, but the nine tails was smiling within his head. There was a final, heavy clank as the iron grate locked. The darkness within the holding cage felt like a heavy burden. The scent of stale sweat and the oppressive heat of a poorly vented forge filled the oppressive air. It was a plain box filled with heavy scrap metal and packed soil that was meant to break men before they even saw the light of the arena. In the middle of the dirt floor, Naruto remained motionless. His neck was encircled by a hefty collar made of rough iron that dug into his skin. He didn't change it, he didn't blink. The sound of boots grinding mud slowly emerged from the shadows. "Look at the colors on this one," a raspy voice said. A huge shadow pulled away from the wall. A flattened, scarred nose caught the weak light from the corridor. The youngster just made it to the scarred man's shoulder. He appeared to the men encircling him to be a thin piece of driftwood that had unintentionally washed into a shark tank. Another man snorted, bright orange, and cracked his knuckles, like a warning sign, or a very, very stupid bird. More shadows moved. There were 5 males altogether. They were men who survived by cannibalizing the weak, the remnants of the land of water. They saw this tiny, silent intruder with the blood-red hair as nothing more than an adrenaline burner. "You're taking up breathing room, freak," the man with scars snarled. He extended a huge, rough-handed hand to Naruto's jacket collar. The man made a lunge. Naruto entered his guard. He struck the man in the ribs with his fist. Crack. It sounded like a hammer breaking dry wood. The enormous man's feet were lifted off the ground by the strike's blunt force density before he could even yell. He crumpled into a still pile after folding in half and colliding with the dirt wall. The cell was silent for a heartbeat, then all 4 of them rushed him at once. It was a slaughter rather than a duel in the complete darkness. Naruto's physique moved with a hollow, feral efficiency. Naruto failed to stop a dagger that glinted in the dark and swept toward his throat. Ignoring the burning slice across his palm, he grasped the blade with his bare hand and forcefully pulled the assailant forward into a crushing knee strike that broke the man's face. Karuma's lips twitched slightly from the pleasure of witnessing the body's crack as the fox's chakra seeped out beneath his skin, not as a visible shroud but as a furnace that burned away his pain and fed his muscles a vicious, inhuman vigor. The massive iron door at the end of the hallway groaned open after 5 minutes. A bright yellow gash was cut across the dirt as torchlight poured into the jail. The enormous broker, Rudo, was standing in the doorway, a rusty iron club perched on his shoulder. "All right, you animals," Rudo growled. "Drag the red-haired scrap out. Time to throw." Rudo came to a halt. In his throat, the words died. The cubicle was a mass of corpses. 5 adult guys with bleeding faces and broken limbs were scattered across the ground. They weren't all standing. Naruto stood in the middle of the light. There were new dark stains on his torn jacket. The deep, jagged whisker markings on his cheekbones were splattered with blood, none of it his own save the blood flowing from his palm. His respiration was not labored. His arms hung limply at his sides, and his stance was totally relaxed. The child turned his head slowly. Those vacuous, molten gold eyes captured the torchlight. It was a natural disaster's icy, uncaring gaze. Naruto questioned, "Is it time?" He spoke in a harsh, flat whisper. Gazing at the blood seeping from the child's chin, Rudo dropped his club. He took a deep breath. "Yeah," Rudo murmured as he moved aside and gestured to the crowd's thunderous noise. "It's time. Walk." Grinding on stone, the hefty iron gate scraped open. Naruto emerged from the oppressive tunnel into a dazzling wall of sound and light. The arena was a huge circular pit carved out of the bedrock, surrounded by 30-foot walls of jagged, slippery stone. Thousands of faces peered over the iron rails above, a sea of screaming, angry shadows demanding blood. The air tasted of cheap ale and copper. "Welcome to the meat grinder," a chakra-enhanced voice exclaimed over the crowd's cacophony. 15 walk in. Only the last one standing eats tonight. 3 more gates ground open across the pit. Out onto the dark soil were 14 men. They were a terrible mix of broken shinobi, banished mercenary, and famished, desperate criminals. They then noticed Naruto. He was positioned at the arena's dead center. The youngster hardly made it to the tiniest man's chest. He did not adopt a combative approach. His molten gold eyes gazed blankly at the stone wall in front of him as his arms hung limply at his sides. Above the arena, a big, rusty iron bell sounded. Naruto remained motionless as the battle started. In a hurricane, he stood like a statue. The youngster was standing motionless when a massive man with a shaved head and a jagged piece of steel noticed him. His features broke into an effortless, malicious smile. The man growled, "Die quietly, brat," and lunged forward. He made a broad, decapitating arc with the heavy steel blade. Naruto would have freaked out in the past. He would have cried for assistance, flailed, or squandered energy. However, the boy who carried out those actions had perished in the jungle. It wasn't merely a cosmetic transformation when his hair turned blood crimson. It was the Uzumaki clan's biological vault finally opening. Suddenly, the massive, crushing life force that his body had been utilizing for the past 12 years only to withstand the fox's poison was diverted into his own muscles and nervous system. He had denser bones. His kinetic eyesight was frighteningly acute. Beneath that, the 9 tails was smiling deep within the seal. At the meantime, the fox was not attacking the cage. Rather, it was actively infusing Naruto's veins with a thick, caustic layer of red chakra. Although it was insufficient to create a cloak, it served as a demonic adrenaline rush that destroyed Naruto's pain receptors and increased his physical strength to unnatural, monstrous heights. Kurama was covering the cost of a front-row seat at the massacre. The air was cut by the blade. Naruto remained unflinching. He only gave his head a slight backward tilt. Past his nostrils, the rusty steel whistled. Naruto's hand snapped up before the enormous man could regain his equilibrium. He refrained from punching. He took hold of the man's massive wrist. His fingers clenched down like a steel vise under the combined strain of the fox's hatred and the density of his Uzumaki blood. The man's eyes grew wide with a sudden, incomprehensible shock. He attempted to pull his arm back, but it was as if he were attempting to extract a limb from a rock. Naruto avoided looking at him. He simply twisted. Crack. The shout of the crowd was drowned out by the sound of the bone splintering as the wrist broke. The man was about to scream, when Naruto intervened, smashed a knee into the side of his leg, and with a horrible pop, inverted the joint. Whimpering, the giant fell to the ground. The remaining fighters were drawn to its nonchalant, mechanical cruelty. When 6 of them realized the tiny child was the real threat, they aimed their firearms at him. Together, in a frenzied pack, they hurried him. At last, Naruto turned to face them. There was nothing in his golden gaze. He destroyed them rather than merely battling them. The men appeared to be moving underwater thanks to his improved reflexes. A mercenary stabbed him in the chest. Naruto ducked, grabbed the wooden shaft, and smashed his palm into the man's elbow, causing the joint to break backward. A knife moved in the direction of his ribcage. Naruto used his body as a meat shield to deflect a third man's spiked club after grabbing the assailant by the throat and effortlessly lifting him off the ground with one hand. With a single, crushing front kick that sent the club wielder 10 feet through the air, he dropped the suffocating shield and broke the man's ribs. It wasn't a conflict. It was a callous deconstruction, because to the fox's endurance, Naruto didn't even have to breathe significantly while working. With the horrifying efficiency of a butcher processing meat, he fought with complete, heartless malice, permanently injuring his opponents. The arena became completely quiet after 3 minutes. A terrified, gasping silence had taken the place of the screaming from the stands. There were 14 men strewn all over the dark ground. The majority were unconscious. The others were writhing, grasping broken limbs and joints. The last person remaining was Naruto. Blood splatters dripped into the vivid, blood-red strands of his hair and flecked his pale skin. He did not triumphantly lift his arms. He merely fixed his lifeless, indifferent look on the shattered corpses. A spectator leaned over the railing up in the stands and pointed a shaking finger at the child covered in blood. "Look at him," the patron said in a whisper that carried across the amphitheater's absolute hush. "He didn't even blink. He's like a walking slaughterhouse. A red ruin." The front rows echoed with the words. Echoing off the smooth stone walls, it was a whisper that soon turned into a murmur, then a chant. Red ruin. Red ruin. Naruto closed his eyes as he lay in the black soil. Deep in his stomach, the fox rumbled with vicious satisfaction. The ruin in red. For a youngster who had nothing left but the rubble of his own mind, it was an appropriate name. Over the past few weeks, the arena has undergone changes. The fragrance of panic filled the air instead of cheap beers and salt. When the little child with the red hair left, the audience stopped laughing. They remained utterly still, awaiting the moist, predictable sound of bone striking dirt. However, there was another reason why the silence was so heavy tonight. The announcer's voice broke with a mixture of genuine fear and excitement. Tonight, she exclaimed. The Red Ruin faces the man deemed too violent even for the Academy's graduation. The man who nearly claimed a seat among the 7 swordsmen. Kujiro the Render. The gate on the other side was kicked off its hinges, not just opened. Out came a man as big as a little mountain. His teeth were sharpened into serrated points, and he was 7 feet of scarred muscle. A large, slab-like cleaver, a jagged piece of iron heavy enough to smash a carriage, was resting on his back. With his iron collar rattling slightly, Naruto stood in the middle of the dark mud. He appeared to be a twig in front of an avalanche. Kujiro didn't hold off till the bell rang. With a roar that sounded like a dying gale, he swung the iron slab in a horizontal arc that was intended to cut the youngster in half. Naruto did more than simply evade. Kurama howled inside the seal, sending a wave of boiling, spiteful strength through the boy's veins. Naruto's pupils became vertical, razor-thin slits. He fell completely to the ground, his hands hitting the earth like paws and his back arching. Cutting into the void where his chest had been a moment earlier, the enormous cleaver whizzed above his head. Naruto blew up. He moved like a trapped apex predator rather than a shinobi. With his claws digging into the compacted ground, he launched himself onto all fours. Kujiro was unable to follow him because he was a terrifying blur of motion. When Kujiro swung once more, Naruto had already left. With a hiss of burning chakra, the child scrambled up the arena's vertical stone wall, his hands and feet sticking to the slippery granite. He fully defied gravity as he sprinted horizontally along the wall, then leapt off like a compressed spring, slamming both feet into the giant's jaw. With blood streaming from his damaged mouth, Kujiro staggered back. "You, little demon." With a blind reach, the giant's enormous hand managed to cut Naruto's leg in midair. Kujiro threw the youngster on the stone floor with a grunt of angry struggle. The bedrock was fractured by the collision. Naruto, however, remained intact. The anguish was immediately banked as the wild chakra erupted. Naruto's golden eyes blazed with a poisonous, predatory brightness as his head snapped up. "My turn," Naruto growled. The air itself appeared to shatter from behind him. His shoulder blades exploded violently into 2 glittering golden chains carved with ancient, jagged seals. They moved like vibrant, ravenous snakes. The chains snapped out, around Kujiro's enormous arms and throat. The Uzumaki chains immediately suppressed the giant's chakra and locked his muscles in place, causing him to scream as the golden light scorched his skin. Naruto refrained from pulling. He hauled. The 7-foot man was ripped off his feet and slammed face first into the arena wall as he dropped back to all fours and jerked the chains fiercely. The sheer kinetic intensity caused the stone to buckle. Unconscious but perfectly intact, Kujiro collapsed into the ground. The globe tipped after that. From the top of the eastern wall came a huge, deafening boom. The stone evaporated rather than merely cracking. Chunks of stone the size of houses were carried down into the pit by a huge stream of extremely pressurized water that crashed through the stands. The blood, the mud, and 12 terrified arena guards were all washed away by the raging blast. As fans crushed one another to get out of the crumbling amphitheater, the screams of the crowd became a chaotic roar of dread. Figures emerged from the mist through the thick dust and the spray of the broken wall. Stepping atop the debris was a woman with eyes like molten emeralds and a sweeping mane of auburn hair. A man with a stern, battle-hardened frown and a patch over his right eye stood next to her. With their swords drawn, dozens of rebel shinobi poured into the opening behind them. The man with the eye patch, "Ow!" yelled, "The arena is breached," as his Baikugan burst to life and the veins surrounding his left eye swelled. "May, the supply vaults are below the stands, just like the intel said." "Good," Mei Terumi remarked, her authoritative voice piercing through the mayhem. "Squad 1, breach the vaults and secure the weapons. Squad 2, blow the locks on the lower levels. Every prisoner in this hellhole goes free tonight." Ao nodded, understood, and looked to the middle of the arena to see if there were any more guard patrols. He paused in the middle of his breath. He locked onto the pit floor with his Byakugan. Lady May. Ao muttered, his tone abruptly losing its composure. Hold on. Look at the pit. The golden chains were gently retracting back into Naruto's spine down in the middle of the destruction. The wild, boiling wrath of the fox started to subside after Kajiro was neutralized, and it retreated behind the seal. Naruto carefully got out of his squat. His clothes were torn and drenched in water and perspiration from the explosion, and his chest heaved. His eyes turned a hollow, molten gold as the poisonous crimson vanished. He was becoming more relaxed, but he remained vigilant. With the cold, calculating stillness of a weapon ready to be aimed, he simply stood ankle-deep in the debris, observing the invaders. May's eyebrows narrowed when she saw the little kid covered in blood. What is it, Ao? She inquired. His chakra network, Ao said, his one tense eye widening. It's unbelievably dense. Violently twisted. I've never seen a physical coil that thick on a kid. He is extremely dangerous, May. Do not approach him lightly. May Terumi gazed down at him. She could see his neck being bitten by the hefty iron collar. She noticed the blood-red hair stuck to his forehead and the fading shine of the golden chains. Uzumaki. Here, at the center of the subterranean meat grinder of the blood mist. May quietly gave the order. The supplies and the prisoners proceed as planned, while keeping her emerald eyes fixed on Naruto. But nobody else touches that boy. He is my top priority now. May Terumi descended into the pit by stepping off the edge of the destroyed stands, her boots slipping a little on the damp, broken stone. May, Ao cautioned from the elevated position, his lone eye fully concentrated. Keep your distance. That boy is a live wire. May disregarded him. She maintained her hands at her sides, visible, relaxed, and open. She made her way through the debris and the shattered corpses of the arena guards until she was just 10 steps from the boy. He appeared even smaller up close. Dried blood stained his collarbone as the iron collar around his neck was pushed bare. May's breath caught in her throat, though, because of his eyes. She had anticipated seeing either the ferocious fury of the beast Ao had sensed or the terrified, hypervigilant gaze of a traumatized youngster. Rather, she saw nothing at all. His eyes were completely hollow, molten gold. He glanced at her, but it seemed as though he was seeing right through her, totally cut off from the mayhem and debris. You don't belong down here, May stated in a cool, collected voice. My name is May Terumi. The men who owned this pit are either dead or running. I'm going to take that collar off your neck, and you are going to walk out of here a free boy. Free, Naruto said once again. In his mouth, the words sounded strange, harsh, and emotionless. He had no desire to be free. Quietness was the price of freedom. He would have to listen to the hidden leaf's echoes because it was quiet. He would have to recall how the peasants treated him, treating him like a piece of dirt beneath their feet. The worst part was that he would have to hear Iruka's voice once more. It was the unvarnished, jagged reality of that night in the woods, not the nice platitudes he had once held onto. I hate you. You're the monster that killed my parents. More harm had been done by those words than by any weapon. Only the Red Ruin, who only felt the fire of the fox's resentment, remained after they had stripped away the Naruto, who aspired to be Hokage. The world was easy in the pit. He broke things before they tried to kill him. The memory of Iruka's face was obscured by the crowd's clamor. Naruto glanced at his completely red-stained hands before turning back to face the woman with auburn hair. Where do we go if I leave this pit? Naruto asked in a deadened, flat murmur. To a war, May said frankly. We are fighting to tear down the Mizukage. It will be dangerous, but you won't be in a cage. Naruto gazed at her for a considerable amount of time. A Mizukage didn't matter to him. All he needed was the sound. In order to avoid feeling the enormous hole where his heart formerly was, he needed something to hit. Will there be people to fight? The question's apathetic gloom made May hesitate. Yes. There will be a lot of fighting. Okay. Naruto murmured. He moved away from the giant's body completely and in her direction. He remained unflinching. He simply leaned forward a little so she could reach the lock and offered his neck. Take it off, then. I'll fight whoever you point me at. May extended her hand and touched the chilly, uneven iron with her fingers. The boy's heartbeat was slow, steady, and eerily serene to her. She yelled, Ow, without turning around. The key is likely with the broker, but we don't have time. Use a precise burst. Silently, Ao descended from the stands and landed behind the boy. Although he disliked being so near the Red Ruin, he complied. He pressed 2 fingers up on the collar's thick iron hinge. "Hold still, brat," Al whispered. He directed a chakra spike that was as thin as a needle straight into the locking mechanism. The iron tumblers evaporated with a startling internal crunch. With a heavy, wet thud, the collar dropped away and hit the black mud. Reaching up, Naruto traced the sore, bruised skin of his neck where the metal had spent weeks. He didn't appear to be relieved. He was not grinning. His blood-red hair cascaded over his dazzling eyes as he simply straightened his shoulders. Mei said, "It's off," as she observed him. "You're a person again, not a prize." Naruto avoided eye contact with her. He turned to face the exit, where the sounds of explosions and clashing steel persisted. He corrected her, "I'm a weapon," in a tone devoid of self-pity. "Just tell me what to break first." The Mizukage's hunter nin patrols were far away from the rebel camp, which was concealed deep within a vast, hollowed-out sea cave. The cavern was a flurry of tumultuous, victorious activity tonight. The little child, drenched in blood, followed Mei Terumi like a shadow as she entered the main cavern. The results of the arena raid were being unpacked all around them. Rebel shinobi were distributing medical supplies, explosive tags, and stolen steel knives while ripping open bulky wooden containers. Dozens of liberated pit fighters were receiving hot meals and medical attention in the middle of the camp. Some were crying, while others were looking in shell-shocked quiet. It was a triumph. However, the surrounding tough shinobi's background talk subsided as Mei led the boy through the camp. They gazed at him. They could smell the pit dirt on his skin and the stale iron. They noticed those vacuous, molten gold eyes looking straight ahead, utterly unaffected by the commotion, the heavily armed guards, or the sobbing detainees. He appeared to be a loaded weapon moving through a crowded room rather than a victim who had been saved. Mei gave a passing medic the order, "Get him to the medical tents," in a calm but stern voice. "Draw hot water. Find him clothes that fit. Burn those orange rags." She paused outside a tent made of thick canvas and turned to face the boy. "Go inside and wash the blood off. The medic will leave clean clothes for you. I will wait out here." He did not acknowledge the courtesy or nod. He simply passed the tent flap and let it to close. The child took off the heavy, tattered remnants of his orange jumpsuit inside the hot tent. He went into the wooden tub's boiling water without flinching. He started scrubbing his skin with the harsh, mechanical bead of the coarse lye soap. He was washing to finish a task, not to feel clean. In the dark, the water quickly turned a dark, rusty hue, a mixture of dirt, his own blood, and the blood of the men he had shattered. When he was done, he went outside and dried off, putting on the loose, dark gray shinobi pants that the physician had placed on a stool, tying the gray sash around them, and covering himself with the new bandages. He put on a sleeveless black shirt that hung loosely on his malnourished body, exposing his skinny, battered arms. He emerged from the tent. He appeared to be a murderer completely devoid of a past, a ghost of the mist. Mei examined him, her emerald eyes focusing on his hair. It remained a disorganized, tangled mess of dried blood and red. The filth was too heavy to just wash away. Pulling a kunai from her pouch, Mei moved forward. "Stand still," she whispered. When she took a large handful of his hair and pulled the razor-sharp steel taut against it, he didn't tense. Mei removed the matted, destroyed locks with a series of swift, deliberate cuts. There were dull thuds when the hefty clusters struck the cave floor. Instead of giving him a tidy, academy-style haircut, she kept it out of his eyes by cutting it short, jagged, and functional. All that was left was a shock of bright, blood-red hair that protruded at acute angles. Mei whispered, "Better," as she moved the kunai. A rebel guard nearby used the tip of his sword to pick up the damaged, blood-soaked orange garment and threw it into a crackling campfire. The vivid fabric curled and turned to black ash as soon as it caught. The boy's expression was completely expressionless as he watched it burn. Mei motioned for him to accompany her to a more peaceful fire close to the cavern's rear, away from the busy supply routes. Mei was given 2 wooden bowls of thick fish and kelp stew by a cook. It smelled strongly like roasted garlic and salt, and it was hot. She sat on a supply crate across from the youngster and gave him one. "Eat," she said softly. "You haven't had a real meal in weeks. You need to rebuild your strength." Mei anticipated a starving child's frenzied, desperate eating. She anticipated that after living on scraps in the dark, he would inhale the food and perhaps even display a hint of relief at the taste of something respectable and warm. None of the actions were taken by him. The dish was in his lap. After glancing at the stew, he picked up the wooden spoon. He chewed into it. He didn't close his eyes to enjoy it. He was not grinning. He simply swallowed, chewed regularly, and waited precisely 3 seconds before swallowing another bite. It was systematic in a terrifying way. He was pushing fuel into a furnace, not eating. May felt her chest constrict. She had witnessed traumatized warriors and battle orphans, but this youngster was something quite different. He had been hollowed out at the center. Is it good? May inquired, searching for a glimpse of humanity or a fissure in his armor. The spoon was halfway to his mouth when he stopped it. In the firelight, his golden eyes were completely flat as he gazed up at her. It's fuel, he said in an inflectionless, hoarse voice. His brow furrowed slightly, not in sorrow but in cold calculation, as he glanced down at the dish and then back at May. I don't have any Rio, he said bluntly. I don't know how much this costs. Who do you want me to kill to pay for it? A chill went down May's spine. She felt ill to her stomach at the utter sincerity in his speech. He genuinely thought that using violence was the only exchange he was worth. To him, a bowl of steaming stew was merely a down payment on a murder. Kindness was an unfamiliar idea. May added, you don't have to kill anyone for the food, in a soft, steady murmur. In her palms, she had forgotten her own dish of stew. She gazed at the youngster, at the dead eyes that belonged in a cemetery and the red hair that she knew belonged to a proud, dead clan. The men in the pit called you the Red Ruin. I don't even know your name. What do I call you? He gazed at the flames between them. The hidden leaf's Naruto Uzumaki. Hokage of the future. The words replayed in his mind, but they sounded like a dead man's joke. The desperate, boisterous child had perished in the land of fire's dirt. However, he had no other name for her. Naruto, he eventually murmured. The name had lost all of its previous warmth and volume due to the emptiness of his voice. Just Naruto. Well, Naruto, May murmured. You're part of this camp now. We take care of our own. You don't buy your meals with blood here. Naruto gazed at her for a long, somber moment. He didn't dispute her, but it was obvious that he didn't trust her either. That was not how the world operated. Not for him. He simply bent his head and chewed on the cave's quiet while taking another robotic bite of the stew. The smell of salt and moist earth filled the sparring cavern the following morning. With his bare feet firmly planted in the ground, he wore the sleeveless black shirt and dark gray pants from the previous evening. Those chilly, deep golden eyes were framed by his vivid, spiky red hair that stood out at sharp angles. His arms dangled limply at his sides as he stood still. We need to see his baseline, Ao said, staring at the boy with just one eye. No chains. No feral chakra. Just the raw physical specs he was using to win his fights. He needs an anchor, May gently corrected. Someone to show him the difference between a spar and a slaughter. Chojuro, step in. A teenager entered the arena from the tunnel across from Naruto. He was 15 years old, with thick square spectacles, shaggy blue hair, and a apologetic posture. He dragged a huge, flat wooden bokken behind him, a solid slab of hard ironwood cut into an odd, asymmetrical flounder shape with two handles. Ao folded his arms up on the balcony. You still have him swinging the ironwood replica. His wrists are going to snap. The Haramekure is a legendary blade, Ao, but it's heavier than a tombstone, May said, following her young apprentice with her gaze. Until Chojuro builds the core strength and muscle memory to swing that bizarre shape without losing his balance, I am not handing him the real steel. Let's see how he handles the weight against a smaller, faster target. Chojuro halted 10 steps away from Naruto down in the ring. A deep blush was starting to crawl up his neck as he hurriedly adjusted his glasses. Chojuro stammered, hello, and bowed deeply and formally. My name is Chojuro. I promise I won't swing too hard. Please let me know if I need to slow down. Naruto gazed at him. The blue-haired youth was a target between him and his next meal, and he processed him in the same manner that he had processed the heavily armed assassins in the pit. With a flat, raspy deadpan voice, Naruto asked, Are you my owner? Chojuro blinked, completely confused. Oh, owner? No, I'm just a chunin. We're just sparring. Ao yelled, Begin, from above. Chojuro raised the big wooden slab into a proper kenjutsu guard by shifting his feet and holding onto its two handles. Okay, whenever you're ready. He was unable to complete the phrase. Naruto blew up. The dense Uzumaki muscle fiber drove him forward at a horrifying, silent pace while the packed soil crunched. In a split second, he completed the 10 paces and moved completely within the enormous wooden sword's reach. Chojiro's eyes widened. He moved so quickly. Just in time, he buried the point of the hefty ironwood blade in the ground after dropping it like a shield. The teenager's kneecap was the target of Naruto's vicious, little punch. Instead, his fist crashed into the ironwood. Like a boom of thunder, the hit reverberated throughout the cavern. The tremendous kinetic force caused Chojuro to slide back a full foot, but the strong wood did not splinter. Naruto glanced at the weapon with his golden eyes. It was blunt as hell. Too broad for aerodynamics. His pit fighter instincts quickly recognized that it's not a sword. It's a crushing bludgeon. Naruto didn't hesitate. Using the recoil, he spun around and delivered a sweeping roundhouse, forcing his heel toward Chojuro's ribs. Chojuro parried the kick by swatting it away with the flat side of the heavy bokken. He then delivered a sweeping blow, targeting Naruto's shoulder with the enormous wooden edge. It was designed to break bone, not to cut. Naruto did not duck. He sank into the swing. With a terrible thud, he allowed the heavy wood to slam into his shoulder. Mei gripped the stone railing tighter. Fearing he had just fractured the boy's collarbone, Chojuro gasped and abruptly stopped his swing. Naruto, however, did not even flinch. As soon as the wooden sword was pinned to his body, he used both hands to seize its edge and lock it in place with a terrible, vice-like grip. Chojuro was knocked off balance by Naruto's furious yanking of the heavy ironwood, and he delivered a vicious headbutt to the teenager's nose bridge by snapping his forehead forward. Chojuro yelled, "Water style! Water mirror!" in a panic. He made a single sign, letting go of the blade with one hand. In the space between them, a disk of glistening water appeared. A flawless, liquid reflection of Naruto shot out of the mirror and headbutted him back as his headbutt crashed into the water. Naruto was thrown backward by the dual collision. He landed in a deep squat like a spring ready to launch again after hitting the ground, skidding, and instantly flipping back onto his feet. His forehead was bleeding, but he didn't rub it. He just fixed his gaze on Chojuro while assessing the water jutsu and getting ready to shatter the teenager's fingers in order to stop any indications. Enough! Mei's words echoed through the cavern like a whip. Naruto came to a sudden stop. As he waited for the next order, he stopped in his crouch, breathing evenly. With his chest heaving, Chojuro let go of the bulky wooden sword. He gazed at Naruto's bleeding forehead and quickly shoved his spectacles back up his nose, his face flushed with dread. Chojuro muttered, "Oh no, I'm so sorry," as he hurried forward and took a fresh white handkerchief out of his pocket. "I panicked. I shouldn't have used ninjutsu in a physical assessment. Are you okay?" Naruto cautiously got to his feet and turned to face the adolescent who was stammering and apologizing. Naruto asked in a tone devoid of any emotion, "Why are you sorry? You defended your vitals. You used an elemental counter. It was efficient." "Because we're on the same side," Chojuro exclaimed, extending the handkerchief hesitantly. "I didn't want to hurt you." Naruto examined the spotless white cloth. He refused to accept it. He glanced up at the balcony where Ao and Mei were observing. "I don't understand the rules of this pit," Naruto said bluntly. Ao exhaled deeply and slowly up on the balcony. His physical strength and kinetic vision are easily high Chunin level. But his combat logic. He fights like a cornered animal trying to ensure a kill. He fights like someone who was never taught how to live, only how to survive, Mei said. But he listened to my command to stop. He can be reached. The sound of the insurgent camp outside was muffled as the command tent's massive canvas collapsed. Mei Terumi approached a table covered with maps and placed her hands on the edge. With a long, weary sigh, she remembered the terrified blue-haired adolescent and the dead-eyed youngster. Behind her, Ao entered the tent, his lone eye narrowed with intense worry. Ao said simply, "He's shattered, Mei," while crossing his arms. "You heard him. He asked Chojuro if he was his new owner. He doesn't understand the concept of allies or training. His mind is a wasteland of survival instincts. Pointing him at Yagura's forces right now wouldn't be deploying a shinobi, it would be unleashing a rabid animal." Mei said, "I know, Ao," as she continued to study the water country map. "Then explain it to me," Ao insisted as he moved in closer. "I understand wanting to rescue a child from the pits. But the moment you saw him, you changed our entire operational priority. You risked the supply raid for a boy who is broken. Why take such a massive interest in him?" Mei pivoted and rested her weight on the table. "It was the chains, Ao." Ao scowled and scanned her face with his one eye. "The chains? I saw them. It's a powerful physical manifestation of his chakra, yes. And finding a living Uzumaki is rare. But enough to risk the rebellion's momentum? You're looking at them as just weapons, Ao," Mei said, lowering her voice to a somber tone. "They aren't just constructs for hitting things. They're called the adamantine sealing chains. It is an ancient, mythical jutsu that the Uzumaki clan guarded with their lives. The chains are literally forged from sealing formulas." The tactical ramifications started to dawn on Ao, and his eyes widened significantly. Fuinjutsu. The ultimate Fuinjutsu, Mei clarified. Those chains are specifically designed to bind, suppress, and paralyze tailed beasts. They can rip the Biju's chakra right back into a seal, or cut off a host from their beast entirely. As Ao stared at her, the tent fell silent, the parts finally fitting together. Yagura, Ao exhaled. Yes, Mei said with a somber nod. Yagura isn't just a tyrant. He is a perfect Jinchuriki who controls the three tails flawlessly. Normal ninjutsu cannot compete with the raw, apocalyptic power of a Biju. And you know what my Byakugan confirmed, Ao said, his hand naturally going to his right eye that was covered. Yagura is being manipulated. He is under an incredibly powerful, constant genjutsu. Someone in the shadows is pulling the strings of a perfect Jinchuriki, turning him into an unstoppable monster. Mei's green eyes hardened into a deadly stare. We may not be able to break that illusion, Ao, she muttered. But if this boy's chains can suppress the Biju's chakra, it strips away Yagura's ultimate physical defense. As the plan solidified, Ao nodded slowly. It levels the playing field. Exactly, Mei said. Without the three tails shielding him, Yagura is just a man. It gives us the window we need to finally separate his head from his shoulders and end the blood mist. Ao rubbed his chin and peered down at the maps. There was no denying the strategic value. It was a lucky break. But then he recalled the boy's eyes, cold, lifeless gold. He's a weapon, then, Ao said in a low voice. A very fragile, very dangerous weapon. No, Mei muttered. A deep, painful sadness took the place of the icy commander's edge in her voice. That is how the pit treated him. That is how whoever abandoned him treated him. Mei glanced at her hands. The cold, heavy iron of the collar she had unfastened from his injured neck was still palpable to her. When the wall fell, and I looked down into that arena. Yes, I recognized the chains. I knew what they meant for the war. Mei's tone shifted significantly. But underneath all that blood, and that terrifying chakra, he just seemed like such a hurt thing, Ao. He looked so small, and so completely empty. If we just point him at our enemies and use him as a tool to kill Yagura, then we are no better than the regime we are trying to destroy. Ao looked at his leader and softened. He was aware that the rebels pursued her with such ferocity because of her compassion. So, what do we do with him? We can't put him in a standard genin squad. He'll kill the first sparring partner who startles him. We don't train him to kill. He already knows how to do that perfectly, Mei said. We train him to focus. You are going to take over his instruction, Ao. Me? Ao objected, his one eye growing wide with real surprise. Mei, you saw his chakra network with your own eyes, and I saw it with the Byakugan. It's a tangled, violent mess. It's thick, chaotic, and saturated with whatever that demonic red chakra is. Can I even teach a boy like that? I don't know if it's physically possible to teach delicate sensory techniques or precise control to someone who is wired strictly to explode. Mei said, then rewire him, Ao, in a tone that made it impossible to disagree. You have the Byakugan. You can monitor his network perfectly and anticipate if that feral chakra spikes again. Teach him chakra control. Teach him sensory jutsu. Teach him how to read a battlefield without just trying to slaughter everything on it. Give his mind a task other than sheer survival. Ao stood silently for a considerable amount of time, taking in the task's extreme difficulties. At last, he exhaled in resignation and nodded sharply and professionally. Understood, Lady Mei. I'll take him out to the sea cliffs this afternoon. I'll make sure the camp knows to give him a wide berth until he learns how to holster his intent. The harsh, icy sting of salt spray was carried by the unrelenting wind off the eastern coast of the Land of Water. A jagged shelf of gray rock protruded over the churning, dark water high above the secret sea cave. Standing close to the edge, Ao's bulky coat snapped in the wind. With his one exposed eye, he turned to watch the boy ascend the rough, steep route. Silently, Naruto moved. His bare feet were silent even on the loose gravel. His jagged red hair was pushed back by the wind as he wore the sleeveless black shirt and dark gray pants. His golden eyes were blank as he stood precisely 5 paces away from Ao, awaiting a command. You're fast, you're strong, and you survived the pit, Ao remarked, his voice easily overpowering the ocean's roar. He didn't say hello. But if you charge at a mist hunter nin the way you charged at Chojuro today, you'll be dead before you cross half the distance. Raw speed and a thick skull aren't enough out here. Naruto remained motionless. Are you going to teach me how to kill people faster? Ao clenched his jaw. No, I'm going to teach you how not to blow yourself up. Ao made a single seal with his hands. The stolen Byakugan blazed to life beneath his eye patch, causing the veins surrounding his right eye to swell uncontrollably. A bright, monochromatic spectrum of chakra pathways took over the planet. Ao took an unconscious half step back when he glanced at Naruto. He had caught a glimpse of it from the arena's stands, but it was astounding up close. Not only were Naruto's chakra coils tight, but they were also huge, scarred, and pulsating with a strong, violent pressure. It didn't resemble the vascular system of a human. It appeared to be a boiling deep-sea vent that was about to explode due to moving tectonic plates. And Ao could see it deep within the boy's stomach. The boy's circulation was directly exposed to a poisonous, microscopic crimson residue from a scary, dense black mass that was a seal of extraordinary complexity. It was physical malice. Even though the wind was frigid, Ao felt a cold sweat prickle his neck as he thought, by the sage, it's amazing that his heart hasn't exploded. You survived by flooding your muscles with as much chakra as possible. It made you hit like a battering ram. But it's reckless. You are leaking energy like a severed artery, Ao said, trying to keep his voice calm while deactivating the Byakugan. Ao grabbed a thick, waxy leaf from a coastal bush that was clinging to the rocks. He raised it. The foundation of all shinobi arts is control. Applying the exact amount of chakra needed for a task. No more, no less, Ao clarified. He touched his own forehead with the leaf. It resisted the strong, erratic ocean wind and remained there flawlessly. Stick this to your forehead. Use just enough chakra to hold it. If you use too little, the wind takes it. If you use too much, you push it away. After removing the leaf, he gave it to Naruto. Naruto examined the leaf. It was a useless exercise. It didn't draw blood or shatter bones. However, he raised his hand and put the green leaf to his forehead after being instructed to do so. He concentrated. When he required chakra in the pit, he simply tore open the valve and allowed the searing heat to flood his veins, numbing the pain. Now, he attempted to pull what he believed to be only a small portion of that power. Crack. The leaf remained in place. It failed to stick. The leaf was torn into green confetti as soon as Naruto's chakra touched it, and the tiny, burned fragments were forcibly blown out across the water by the sheer, raw density of his energy. Naruto's expression remained unchanged as he lowered his hand. He glanced at the ocean before returning his attention to Ao. Naruto said, "It broke," in a lifeless, raspy voice. He looked at the robust shrub from which Ao had removed it. "Do you want me to just go break something else?" Ao squeezed the bridge of his nose and exhaled slowly. He was attempting to teach a cyclone how to thread a needle. An anxious voice said, "No, he just wants you to let it float, above the wind." As Chojuro walked up the rocky, steep slope, Ao turned, his one eye narrowing. The kid with blue hair was carrying a modest bundle of packaged food and a bulky leather canteen. He pushed his square glasses up his nose and appeared to be out of breath. Chojuro stammered, "Lady May asked me to bring up water and lunch," bowing briefly and apologetically to Ao before turning to face Naruto. He saw the charred, shredded pieces of green leaf strewn on the pebbles near the boy's naked feet. Chojuro whispered, "You're pushing the chakra out," as he approached the same coastal plant and took a fresh leaf. When you're fighting, you push it out to hit hard. But holding a leaf isn't about hitting it. Naruto gazed at the adolescent. If someone broke up a battle in the arena, you had to kill them first. However, the boy had brought water. Furthermore, he was not brandishing his enormous wooden sword. Chojuro put the leaf to his forehead. His shaggy blue hair was blown around by the sea wind, but it remained precisely in place. "Don't think of your chakra like a hammer," Chojuro said, his anxious stutter lessening now that he was discussing jutsu. "Think of it like the ocean down there. If a wave crashes into a cliff, it breaks the rock. That's what you just did to the leaf. But if the water just pools on the surface, it creates suction, it holds on." After removing the leaf, Chojuro gave it to the boy with the lifeless eyes. "Naruto, don't hit the leaf," Chojuro whispered gently, "just let the water sit." Naruto gazed at the leaf that Chojuro was holding. The kindness was beyond his comprehension. Why this youngster, whom he had attempted to cripple that morning, was attempting to assist him was beyond him. However, he saw the reasoning. Avoid striking. Naruto picked up the leaf. He closed his golden, hollow eyes and sat cross-legged on the hard stone. He imagined the deep-sea vent inside his stomach, dark and boiling. He pictured a single, hefty drop of water leaking to the surface rather than tearing the valve open. The leaf was crushed on his forehead. It didn't tear, nor did it adhere flawlessly. 3 seconds later, the leaf's edge was pulled away by a strong blast of wind, sending it hurtling over the cliff. When Naruto opened his eyes, he saw nothing, 3 seconds, Ao murmured, giving Chojuro a startled look. He folded his arms and glanced back down at the boy. It's a start. Keep sitting there, Naruto. You aren't leaving this cliff until you can hold it for an hour. That rock was the focus of the first 2 days. Naruto stayed awake. The bitter cold and the coastal rain that came in on the second morning didn't bother him. He simply sat cross-legged and adjusted his chakra's small flow while gazing blankly ahead. He had held a single, unshredded green leaf to his forehead for 3 hours in a row during a torrential downpour by the second day's dusk. As Ao ascended the path, he immediately removed the damp leaf from Naruto's forehead. With hollow golden eyes, Naruto gazed up. Did I fail? No, Ao firmly said. He took 2 more leaves out of his pocket and threw them upon Naruto's lap. Now do it with one on each hand while standing on one leg. You have until tomorrow. Naruto didn't moan or sigh. He simply got up, placed the leaves against the backs of his hands, and lifted one bare foot off the chilly stone. By the 4th day, Ao had come to the conclusion that the youngster was completely unaffected by conventional punishment. His baselines were weariness and pain. Thus, Ao altered the surroundings. He guided Naruto to the sea cliff's edge and pointed directly down at the raging ocean that crashed against the jagged rocks 50 feet below. The leaf taught you a steady output, Ao shouted over the waves. Now you need dynamic output. Focus chakra into the soles of your feet to create suction. Walk down to the water, touch the surf, and walk back up. No hands. Naruto took a step off the edge. Before his focus wavered, he downed the vertical drop precisely 10 feet. The stone beneath his foot broke as his deep chakra burned too hot. With a bone-jarring smash, he fell 40 feet and hit the choppy water. His little body was instantly pushed into the rough seawall by the powerful waves. Ao coiled up on the edge, ready to jump in. However, a moment later, a little hand with bruises clutched a rough rock. Naruto hauled himself out of the icy waves. A dark bruise was already developing on his ribs, and his lip was split. That day, he fell 6 more times. With his lungs burning from the ocean and his famished muscles trembling with fatigue, he crawled out of the surf each time and began again. Nearly as quickly as the rocks tore his split skin apart, his terrible Uzumaki healing factor sewed it back together. He only saw it as an unsolved equation. On the 6th day, he was able to run up and down the wet, sheer rock face without shattering any stones. The camp was covered in long, gory orange shadows as the sun began to set on the 7th day. Ao blindfolded Naruto with a thick black cloth strip and made him sit in the mud close outside the tree line. In the mist, we fight in zero visibility, Ao said as he paced silently around the child wearing a blindfold. If you rely on your eyes, you die. In the pit, you relied on killing intent. You felt the hatred of your opponents and reacted to it. That keeps you alive in a cage, but it makes you blind to everything else. I want you to feel the ambient chakra around you. Stop looking for threats, look for presence. Naruto inhaled the humid sea air. He extended his consciousness. He had to deliberately push his attention past the roaring, poisonous furnace of the fox trapped in his own stomach before he could sense the outside world. It was deafening how dense the beast was. It was like trudging through deep, empty muck after he overcame that mental static. He hardly saw regular chakra because he was so accustomed to looking for the smothering, searing heat of hatred. Tell me what you feel, Ao ordered. Naruto forced himself to ignore his impulses and concentrate more. Behind his blindfold, the darkness started to change. Around him, he sensed a disciplined, acute point of pressure. Unlike the killers in the arena, it didn't burn. It felt intentional, orderly, and serene. You, Naruto murmured. You feel like a drawn sword, cold iron. Ao ceased to pace. Good. What else? Naruto forced his consciousness farther down the route made of dirt that led to the camp. He sensed another kind of pressure coming. The jagged edge of Ao's chakra was nothing like that. This one was quite uneasy, weighty, and moving. It was like the quivering of a deep pool of water just before a storm. However, beneath the nervousness, it wasn't dangerous. For the first time in his life, Naruto experienced a chakra signature that had no desire to harm him. Naruto said, the boy with the blue hair, as he turned his blinded head precisely to face the way. He's carrying metal, and cooked meat. Footsteps crunched on the gravel a moment later. Carrying 2 metal tins of steaming ration stew, Chojuro left the tree line. The blindfolded Naruto aimed straight at the teen's chest, causing him to halt and blink in shock. Chojuro nervously adjusted his glasses and said, am I interrupting? Ao moved forward to remove Naruto's blindfold. With a spark of hard-earned respect in his lone eye, The scarred veteran gazed down at the kid. No, Shojiro. Your timing is perfect, Ao murmured. He turned to face Naruto again. You stopped looking for enemies, Naruto. You found an ally. It seems our pit fighter is finally learning how to be a shinobi. Naruto looked at the stuttering adolescent with blue hair and lowered his hand. With an uncomfortable little smile, Shojiro extended one of the heated metal tins to him. The aroma of hot broth and salted fish filled the air. Naruto handled it with caution. He did not smile back, nor did he feel proud of his mastery of the sensory technique. However, when he gripped the hot food, a deep, subdued insight entered his shattered psyche. He only threw food into the soil in the pit after breaking someone's bones. He had not engaged in combat here. No blood had been drawn by him. The sun was set, so the boy had just brought him dinner. Naruto looked down at his reflection in the steaming stew and thought, I am not in a cage. I'm learning how to see from them. Even so, they continued to feed me. Inside the rebel base's deepest cavern, the air was motionless. The moist stone walls were illuminated solely by the steady, warm glow of a dozen iron lamps, and there was no wind. With his hands limp by his sides, Naruto stood silently in the shadows close to the entrance. With his arms folded and his lone eyes set on the middle of the room, Ao stood a few steps ahead of him. Mei Terumi was standing next to a large, long stone table. A huge object covered in thick white sealing bandages rested on top of it. Mei gave the order, step forward, Shojiro, her voice reverberating softly off the subterranean walls. She sounded nothing like the friendly, kind woman who distributed meals. She had a cage-like voice. Shojiro moved into the light of the lantern. His enormous, worn-out ironwood training sword was resting against the wall outside. He paused in front of the stone table, his hands shaking a little, but he pulled his chin up to meet Mei's emerald eyes despite his apprehensive appearance. Mei placed her palm on the bundled item and spoke softly, For 2 years, you have swung a dead block of ironwood. You have battered your joints, exhausted your chakra, and carried a ridiculous burden without once complaining. Do you know why I made you train with the replica for so long, Shojiro? 2. To build the muscle memory, Lady Mei, Shojiro replied in a tense, eager tone. So the shape wouldn't break my wrists. That is half the reason, Mei softly clarified. The other half is because a sword of the mist is a curse just as much as it is a weapon. The men who wielded them before us let the blades turn them into monsters. They slaughtered their comrades. They embraced the blood mist. I needed to know that if I gave you the weight of a legend, it wouldn't crush your kindness. With his golden eyes fixed on the shadows, Naruto observed. He took in the conversation as if it were a foreign language. You obtained a weapon in the fighting pits by extracting it from the man you had just killed's lifeless hands. A weapon was a means of killing. However, Mei was not giving Shojiro a murderous weapon, it was being handled like a vow by her. Mei took hold of the white bandage's edge and tugged. The bulky material fell to the stone floor as it unwound. Haramekure was beneath it. In the lantern light, the fabled twin-handled broadsword shone. Forged from a black, extremely solid steel, it was enormous and asymmetrically formed like a flatfish. Near the tip, 2 round holes that hummed softly with dormant energy were etched. Mei said, Mangetsu Hazuka was the last man to carry this, raising the extremely heavy sword with both hands and extending it. He died for a village that was already rotting. You will not die for the mist, Shojiro. You are going to help me rebuild it. Take your blade. Shojiro took a step forward and extended both hands. He held onto the 2 handles. The steel's sheer weight threatened to pull Mei to the ground as he released his grip. However, Shojiro did not give up. On the cliffs, he recalled his own counsel. Avoid striking. Allow it to collect. His enormous chakra reserves were thrust into the hilts. Abruptly, a dazzling, pale blue light glowed from the 2 holes near the blade's tip. In his palms, the blade thrummed and came to life, adapting to his chakra signature. Shojiro's arms ceased to shake. With ease, he raised the fabled sword and placed its flat side on his shoulder. He no longer appeared to be a stuttering, anxious adolescent. He had the appearance of one of the 7 ninja swordsmen. I will not fail you, Lady Mei, Shojiro muttered. Mei grinned, a warm, sincere smile reappearing on her face. She gazed past Ao and away from the blue-haired genius, focusing instead on the young child with red hair who was standing in the shadows. Naruto. Step into the light. With his bare feet creating no sound on the stone, Naruto advanced. He paused next to Chojiro and gave the cage a blank stare. Mei examined him closely. Ao tells me you held the leaf for 3 hours in a storm, and that you successfully tracked a moving chakra signature while blindfolded, Mei remarked. He says you are learning the difference between a sparring partner and a target. I am learning the rules, Naruto firmly said. Mei responded, good, because today, I am giving you your first target, as she approached a map that was affixed to the cavern's wall. Far to the north, she indicated a seaside inlet. 2 days ago, Yagura's hunter Nin raided a civilian port that was secretly supplying us with medical rations. They slaughtered the merchants and seized the supplies. Right now, that stolen medicine is sitting in a fortified outpost on the northern cliffs. Ao stepped forward, narrowing his eye. An outpost? Lady Mei, that's heavily guarded territory. Are you sure they are ready for a frontline strike? We are bleeding supplies, Ao. We need that medicine back, Mei forcefully stated. She glanced first at Chojuro and then at Naruto. This is a retrieval and elimination mission. Chojuro, you will act as the vanguard. You are to breach the front gates and draw their attention. Ao, you are the squad leader. You will coordinate from the perimeter with your Byakugan. At last, Mei glanced down at Naruto. His eyes were a mechanical, hollow gold that she could see. A typical 12-year-old was not being sent into battle by her. She had a loaded weapon in her hand. Naruto, Mei murmured in a deadly serious whisper. While Chojuro draws their eyes, you will slip into the armory through the shadows. Anyone guarding the medical supplies is an enemy of this rebellion. You do not hold back. You do not wait for a command. Do you understand? Naruto acted without hesitation. He studied the map and committed the coordinates to memory before turning back to Mei. I understand, Naruto growled. You want me to break them. The northern outpost's stone walls were battered by the Land of Water's unrelenting coastal rain. 24 of Yagura's staunch hunter Nin stood watch over this ugly, windowless castle that was constructed right into the side of a craggy cliff. Ao brought 2 fingers together while crouching on a steep, overhanging cliff high above the citadel. The Byakugan burst to life, causing the veins surrounding his right eye to swell beneath his eye patch. The stark, monochromatic world of chakra networks took the place of the stone walls through the pouring rain. Ao quickly mapped the courtyard. Inside the walls were 20 guards. There are 4 guards on the perimeter. 2 were positioned to guard the pilfered medical containers deep within the central armory. Ao gestured to the 2 people who were waiting in the shadows below by raising his hand. Start. The enormous 30-foot-tall iron-reinforced timber gates stood in front of the stronghold. With his boots splashing in the muddy road, a lone figure emerged from the tree line. A loyalist guard peered through the rain up on the battlements. Hey, stop right there, identify yourself. Chojuro remained silent. With rain-stained thick spectacles, the 15-year-old entered the torchlight. He grabbed the dual handles of Haramekure by reaching over his shoulder. He removed the enormous, asymmetrical broadsword from its case. The mud was thudded by the massive steel. Inhaling deeply, Chojuro pushed his enormous chakra reserves into the hilts. A brilliant, pale blue light emanated from the 2 circular holes near the blade's tip as they roared to life. The chakra quickly grew, covering the actual steel with a huge, luminous, ethereal hammer. The guard yelled, "Intruder," while struggling to find an alarm bell. Not the only one, Chojuro silently clarified. He made a huge, upward arc with the fabled blade. With the fury of a meteor, the glowing chakra hammer crashed into the fortified gates. The rain itself separated as a result of the impact's loud shockwave. The enormous wooden doors burst inward in a spray of lethal splinters, and the huge iron hinges shattered like dry twigs. The outpost was immediately filled with alarms. Screaming commands, every guard in the courtyard pulled out their weapons and ran toward the broken front gate to confront the 7 swords holder. Just as intended, Naruto moved to the other side of the stronghold, tucked up in the complete darkness of the sheer cliff wall. He did not employ a grappling hook. He didn't leap. He ascended the 80-foot-high stone wall in a straight line. The granite was wet from the rain as his bare feet touched it. The sea cliffs came back to him. Avoid striking. Put the water in a pool. Make a suction. Without breaking a single pebble, he bound himself to the slick stone by precisely controlling the chakra to the soles of his feet. Silent, frighteningly quick, and unaffected by the tremendous drop beneath him, he moved like a spider. He knelt on the parapet and crested the top of the back wall. Shouts, steel clashing, and Chojiro's screaming water-style jutsu could all be heard down in the courtyard. Naruto kept his eyes off the fight. His golden eyes were closed. He disregarded the sound of the rain. Sinking into the sensory emptiness Ao had taught him only 3 days earlier, he forced his consciousness outward. The guards were hurrying toward the front, and he could feel their sharp, terrified pressures. More significantly, though, he sensed two disciplined, static forces right below him in the armory. Two objectives. Down 70 feet. Waiting. Naruto's eyes opened. He fell freely into the dim lane behind the central keep after dropping from the inside of the parapet. He landed silently in the mud, using his knees to properly absorb the kinetic impact. The armory's hefty iron door was secured from the inside. The handle was not tested by Naruto. He moved to the side of the door and put his hand on the keep's sturdy stone wall. He directed his dense Uzumaki chakra into his palm as a powerful, concentrated spike rather than a soft suction. As the sensory cacophony erupted at the front of the fortress, he waited, timed his breathing. Chojiro's hammer blow caused a loud shockwave that shook the bedrock beneath his feet and divided the rain a second later. Naruto unleashed the chakra just as the tremendous boom struck the alleyway. Crack! A young boy could have slipped through the hole made when the stone broke inward. As the fortress trembled from the vanguard's blow, the two loyalist guards inside the armory pulled out their kunai, their gaze shooting toward the ceiling. Neither of them saw the dust accumulating close to the rear wall because they were both distracted by the noise. Naruto leapt straight up into the wooden rafters using the momentum he had gained from his entrance. His naked feet were fixed to the wood as he dangled upside down from a support beam. His brilliant, vacuous eyes followed the soldier as he moved beneath him. Naruto would have used enormous quantities of wild chakra in the fighting pit as he yelled and descended to smash the man's head. He was productive today. In complete silence, Naruto fell. He touched down right behind the first guard. Naruto clasped his left hand over the guard's mouth and viciously slammed the palm of his right hand up into the base of his skull before the man could even notice the change in air pressure. There was a horrible pop as the neck snapped. Naruto prevented the body from making noise when it touched the ground. He slowly lowered the lifeless weight to the stone while holding it. The second guard scowled at the darkness as he stood near the crates. "Kato, did you find the breach?" Naruto emerged from the darkness. His jagged red hair and the horrifying, lifeless vastness of his eyes were illuminated by the weak lantern light. With a gasp, the guard made a fire-style jutsu hand sign with his hands flying together. Intru. The first sign was never completed by him. In a split second, Naruto moved within the guard's grasp and traversed the 20 feet separating them. A dust cloud was created by the rapid acceleration. In order to shatter the jutsu formation, Naruto seized the man's wrists and aggressively pulled them apart before stepping into his center of gravity. Naruto locked the man in a perfect, bone-crushing chokehold after breaking his left arm with a vicious, exact twist that spun him around. Naruto's hold was like a steel vice as the guard flailed, kicking violently against the medical cartons. He didn't use the power of the nine tails. He didn't call forth the chains. He just put precisely the right amount of pressure on the carotid artery. The guard went limp at precisely 6 seconds. The unconscious man was dropped to the ground by Naruto. He moved quietly toward the piled wooden crates, stepping over the body. He verified the medical seals by looking at the marks. With his Byakugan fixated onto the armory, Ao remained still atop the cliff. Through the walls, he had witnessed the entire infiltration. In less than 15 seconds, without wasting a single drop of needless chakra, he had witnessed the youngster skillfully ascend the whetstone, break through the armory, and extinguish 2 hardened Chunin-level soldiers. It was a master class in covert murder. It was horrifyingly flawless, brutal, and surgical. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain went down Ao's spine as he lowered his hands and deactivated the Byakugan. The savage pit fighter's transformation into a focused shinobi was Mei's goal. Gazing down at the shadowy stronghold, Ao thought, "Gods help us. We did more than simply help him concentrate. We used a scalpel on a monster." Naruto stood over the medical crates down in the armory. He used his sensory sweep to feel the region. Clear. To indicate extraction, he reached into his pouch, took out a flare, and broke it, illuminating the room with a brilliant red light. He wiped a single drop of blood from his cheek and sat down on one of the crates to wait, breathing evenly. His visage was a blank mask as he thought, "The targets are down. I'm making a living." The armory's huge iron front door groaned loudly as it was pushed open. Breathing heavily, Chojiro entered the doorway with his thick blue hair stuck to his forehead from the rain. The luminous chakra hammer had dissolved back into the dark steel, but Haramakare was still resting securely on his shoulder. His eyes widened slightly as he surveyed the dimly lighted room and noticed the 2 loyalist guards, one dead and the other unconscious, as well as the little child with red hair who was sitting quietly on the boxes in the flare's red glow. A moment later, Ao fell silently into a squat from a grated ventilation duct in the ceiling. Brushing stone dust from his coat, the scarred veteran got to his feet. He didn't give Naruto any credit. He simply strolled in the direction of the wooden crates bearing the medical cross. With a loud splintering of wood, he pulled out a kunai and shoved it under the lid of the closest box, forcing it open. Ao peered inside. He produced a sealed glass bottle of coagulant and a bulky roll of spotless bandages. Ao verified, the supplies are intact, and threw the bandages back into the carton. Chojuro, signal the retrieval team to bring the carts up. Yes, Captain, Chojuro said with a nod before returning to the rain. Ao remained in the poorly lighted armory, staring down at the two vanquished guards. They weren't your typical grunts. They donned the elite hunter Nin's armored vests. He gazed at the enormous steep drop of 80 feet that Naruto had just climbed to reach this location. Ao narrowed his lone eye. Mei had sent them here for more than just bandages. By the time they got back to the secret rebel camp, the rain had finally ceased. Standing over her expansive map of the water country, Mei Terumi was waiting in the command tent. Ao marched in with a severe, hardened frown on his face as the heavy canvas flap pushed open. Naruto trailed following him in silence, while Chojuro trailed uncomfortably behind him. The medical supplies are secure, Lady Mei, Ao said, approaching the war table directly. The retrieval team is unloading them into the infirmary now. Without taking her eyes off the map, Mei said, excellent work, Ao. Were there any casualties on our side? None, Ao said in response. His knuckles rested on the table as he bent forward. But that was a suicide run for a standard squad, Lady Mei. A sheer 80-foot rear cliff, reinforced iron gates, and inner sanctum guards who were easily cage guard level. You didn't just send us there because it was the closest depot. As Ao's words sank in, Chojuro blinked and gripped the wrapped hilt of Haramakere. At last, Mei raised her head and met Ao's single, passionate glance with her emerald eyes. She didn't dispute it. Mei said, yes, we needed the medicine. But more importantly, I needed a target difficult enough to prove you were ready, in a firm and authoritative tone. She gave Chojuro a look. I needed to know if the vanguard could shatter the front gates of a heavily fortified stronghold and survive the concentrated fire of an entire garrison. She gave Ao a look. I needed to know if the coordinator could track a chaotic battlefield through solid stone and guide a strike team perfectly in the dark. Her gaze finally fell on Naruto. The boy's face was a blank mask as he stood motionless in the tense shadows. He didn't appear to be troubled by the fact that he had broken a man's neck tonight. Nor did he appear to be proud of it. All he had done was earn his keep by doing this task. And I needed to know, Mei said softly, if the shadow could scale an impossible cage-level defense and neutralize elite guards before they could even sound an alarm. If we are going to rely on Naruto's chains to suppress the three tails, he has to prove he can get close enough to the Mizukage to actually use them. Ao folded his arms as the awful, weighty knowledge descended upon the tent. The test had been passed by them. You're done waiting, Ao muttered. We are bleeding out in these caves, Ao. The blood mist takes more of our people every single day, Mei stated, putting her hands flat on the table. A furious, unflinching resolution hardened her eyes. The boy's control is steady. Chojuro has mastered the blade. You have the Byakugan. Mei gazed at the three of them, the future bearing a heavy burden. Rest up tonight, check your gear, say your prayers to whatever gods you still believe in, Mei commanded in a final tone. Tomorrow at dusk, we march on the capital. We are going to kill Yagura. The old-growth woodland was shrouded in the thick, oppressive fog of the land of water. The enormous stone walls of the capital city were visible in the distance through the dense gray mist, a dark stain against the dusk sky. Silently, the striking squad made their way through the tall branches. With his Byakugan slicing through the thick fog to map the patrols ahead, Ao took the initiative. Mei Terumi trailed closely after him, a mask of deadly concentration on her face. With Haramakere's bulky, bundled mass securely fastened to his back, Chojuro trailed after. Naruto took the flank on the right. Without making a sound, he sprang from branch to limb, his bare feet perfectly absorbing the impact. His golden eyes were fixed on the shadowy canopy, his senses searching for anything that Ao's gaze might overlook. Ao murmured, 3 patrols passing below us, into their ears via the radio cable. Wait for them to cross the ravine, then we push to the outer wall. Naruto landed softly on a huge redwood's thick, moss-covered trunk. He knelt, getting ready to jump to the next tree. Just beneath his foot, a slight, abrupt rise in chakra was detected by his sensory sweep. It wasn't a human, it was ink. In addition to patrolling the area, Yagura's Anbu had placed latent explosive tags in the bark of the trees and coated them with a thin layer of physical mud to conceal them from the Byakugan until someone approached close enough to activate the seal. Naruto refrained from shouting. He was too late to alert the others. He just hurled himself backward off the limb, pushing all of his deep Uzumaki chakra into his legs. Boom! A brilliant blaze of yellow fire and splintering timber exploded from the canopy. The enormous redwood was split in two by the loud tsunami that tore apart the fog. Naruto was thrown violently through the trees by the blast, which caught him in midair. He slammed into the muddy forest floor after crashing through dense trees. A typical genin would have been instantly killed by the explosion, but before he had stopped rolling, the dense, boiling chakra in his stomach flooded his wounded ribs, stitching the cracks back together. Unfazed by the ringing in his ears, he put his palms in the muck and leapt back up. The strategy of stealth was no longer viable. A voice yelled, "Ambush!" Through the trees. Numerous hunter nin descended from the upper canopy, their white porcelain masks slicing through the explosion's residual smoke. They had been anticipating the detonation of the traps. The woodland descended into chaos. "Keep pushing toward the wall," yelled Mei. She didn't pull a knife. She simply took a deep breath and let forth a huge, horrifying wave of caustic, corrosive mist. "Release the boil." The 3 hunter nin who were falling on her shouted as their armor and weapons suddenly melted, causing them to flee in terror. Chojuro pulled out his broadsword to her left. He swung the pale blue chakra hammer in a stunning arc, slamming 2 elite soldiers right through a tree trunk as it sparked to life in the darkness. Neither Mei nor the swordsman caught Naruto's attention. He was dealing with his own issue. In the mud, 6 hunter nin landed in a perfect circle around him. They glanced at his diminutive stature, his lack of armor, and the blood seeping from the blast on his forehead. He was thought to be the weak point. They launched their deadly, flawless attacks in unison. The other 4 quickly made hand signals, and 2 emerged from the front with their blades drawn. Severing wave in water style. Naruto was attacked from 4 different directions by high-pressure streams of water that were sharp enough to cut through solid steel. The 2 swordsmen drove their blades at his chest at precisely the same moment. Naruto would have attempted to avoid or burn enough raw chakra to shatter their weapons in the fighting pit. But he had learned control from Ao. He didn't squander energy on fear. He pulled on the old, frightening lineage that lay dormant in his veins as he observed the impossibility of the trap closing in on him. He didn't draw the red malice of the fox. He did his own. The muddy jungle was filled with the thunderous sound of iron grinding. From the base of Naruto's spine, 4 enormous, brilliant golden chains erupted forcefully. With the crushing weight of a crumbling mountain, they tore into the physical world rather than simply appearing. Like enraged golden serpents, the chains lunged forth. The ninjutsu was broken into innocuous mist when the first chain whirled around and struck the high-pressure water streams. The enemy chakra was immediately consumed by the sealing formulas etched on the golden iron. There was hardly time for the 2 swordsmen to blink. Ignoring their raised swords, the second and third chains charged ahead. With the ferocity of a battering ram, the golden iron struck their chests, encircling their torsos and lifting them off their feet. The adamantine sealing chains violently blocked every ounce of chakra in the hunter nin's bodies, instantaneously paralyzing them as they coughed and dropped their swords. The 4 Anbu that remained froze, their eyes bulging in sheer terror behind their masks. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was like being in front of a tailed beast due to the intense pressure emanating from the boy's golden chains. With the explosion burning in the trees above him, Naruto stood in the middle of the muddy crater. The dazzling glare of his own chains reflected in his lifeless golden eyes. He didn't appear to be a boy. He appeared to be an old, angry deity of sealing. He gave his wrists a flick. The immobilized swordsmen were forcefully pushed into the ground by their shackles, rendering them unconscious. A third assassin was dragged screaming into the mud by the 4th chain, which whipped through the woods and tore straight through the dense branches. Ao stared down into the mud while driving his kunai through a loyalist's throat from a higher branch. He observed the diminutive, red-haired youngster using the legendary Uzumaki clan's jutsu with ease, casually destroying elite water-style techniques and batting heavily armed assassins out of the air like flies. With his one eye wide with wonder, Ao shouted, "Lady Mei," over the clashing steel and screaming flames. "Naruto is clear. Keep moving." With a heavy metallic clink, Naruto's chains retracted back into his spine, crushing the last of the opposition in his sector. With a blank mask covering his face, he stepped over the hunter nin's moaning, immobilized bodies and launched himself into a dead sprint toward the capital's towering walls. The Mizukage's murder had started. The fog had been torn away by the woodland explosion. From the highest point of the capital's fortifications came the sound of a hefty, jagged war horn. Hundreds of Yagura's loyalist hunter nin poured out into the muddy clearing as the enormous iron gates groaned wide, their drawn swords catching the harsh glare of the burning woods. Swarming forward to smash the little strike force that had tripped their traps, they advanced in perfect, scary formation. With his Byakugan scanning the overwhelming numbers, Al landed on a sturdy branch next to Mei. "Lady Mei, we are vastly outnumbered. The entire vanguard is rushing the tree line." Mei Terumi didn't appear scared. With her auburn hair blowing in the wind, she stood serenely on the branch. With a cold, merciless smile, she turned to face the army of the blood mist that was charging toward her. "Let them rush the trees, Ao," Mei said. "They are looking at the wrong targets." She lifted her hand and made a single, pointed hand gesture. Another horn blew behind them, deep in the jungle. It didn't sound like a warning, though. It had a roar-like sound. Abruptly, the remaining mist behind the attacking team disintegrated. Hundreds of rebel shinobi raced forward from the shadows of the forest. These were the men and women who had waited years for this precise moment, who had starved in the caverns, and who had lost their families due to Yagura's purges. Like a tidal wave, they dashed against the loyalist vanguard. Outside the city gates, the thunderous roar of a full-scale conflict broke out. Massive water walls crashed into the ground, fireballs lighted up the night sky, and the thunder was muffled by the anguished screams of warring armies. The loyalist forces left their defensive positions on the walls to participate in the carnage because they were preoccupied by the sudden, enormous rebel army tearing into their ranks. Mei gave the order, "The army has the gates," as she turned away from the enormous conflict. "We take the head of the snake. Move." The four of them stayed out of the mud fight. They avoided the mayhem by shooting through the canopy. 100 yards from the main gate, they struck the capital's imposing stone wall. Naruto didn't slow down. He ran straight up the 80-foot wall after channeling his dense chakra into his bare feet and striking the vertical stone. Chojuro, Mei, and Ao trailed closely behind him. They descended into the city after climbing the wall. The streets were deserted. To combat the rebel force, all of the guards and Anbu had hurried to the front gates. There was a clear path leading to the Mizukage's tower, a huge, majestic spire in the heart of the metropolis. The sound of the battle was far behind them as they moved like ghosts across the rooftops. Al raised a hand when they touched down in the center tower's courtyard. His right eye's veins swelled up sharply. Al murmured, "The outer guards are gone," but he left his personal Anbu detail inside, as his lone eye followed the blue chakra networks through the tower's solid stone. 6 guards on the ground floor. 4 on the stairs, 2 directly outside his office door on the top floor. They are elite. "We don't have time for a prolonged fight," Mei remarked, squinting at the tower's bulky wooden doors. "If Yagura realizes the army is just a distraction, he will level this entire city with a tailed beast bomb to wipe us out." With his hands clutching Hiramikare's dual handles, Chojuro moved forward. "I'll clear the ground floor, Lady Mei." "No," a flat, raspy voice cut in. The blue-haired swordsman was passed by Naruto. The boy's empty golden eyes were fixed on the keep's main doors. From the base of his spine, 4 golden chains slowly slithered out and hovered about him like luminous, dangerous serpents in the dark. "You hit too hard. It makes noise," Naruto said bluntly while glancing at the enormous broadsword. "They won't hear my chains. I will clear the stairs." Mei glanced at Ao, then nodded firmly once. The huge front doors were not pushed open by Naruto. He just slipped through a high, grated window and vanished into the darkness next to the stone archway. Outside the tower, there was a long, anxious silence. Ao saw the boy's little, thick crimson chakra signature fall into his Byakugan. On the ground floor, he observed the 6 elite guards drawing their firearms. In the gloom, he saw the boy's golden chains lash out. It was a massacre. The deafening, explosive sound of a broadsword was not produced by the chains. Before the elite Anbu could even scream, they were dragged out of sight by their horrific, brutal force, which crushed windpipes and instantaneously suppressed chakra networks. Ao stared as the youngster ascended the stairway, a silent, unrelenting predator unaffected by their terrified defenses. "Clear," Ao exhaled, truly troubled by how quickly it had ended. "The ground floor and the stairs are empty. He is waiting for us at the top floor." Chojuro and Mei pushed open the entrance doors. Anbu who were immobilized and unconscious were scattered around the bottom floor. They didn't pause to examine the corpses. Their footsteps echoed in the strange silence of the tower as they ran up the twisting stone stairs. The air changed the moment they arrived at the top floor. It was oppressively hot, oppressive, and heavy. Naruto stood motionless in the dimly lit hallway. The last two Anbu guards were at his feet, their armor crushed by the golden chains that had already pulled back into his spine. At the end of the hall, he was gazing at the enormous, heavy wood door. The office of the Mizukage. Ao moved up next to the youngster and said, "You feel it, don't you?" Naruto gave a slow nod. He could feel the pressure seeping through the wood without the aid of Ao's sensory training. The enormous, imprisoned fox was growling deep below his stomach, disturbed by the well-known, ancient presence beyond the door. It was the Three Tails Untamed, terrible chakra. Mei moved to the front of the group and touched the hefty oak door with her palm. With waves of cage-level strength radiating from her, she took a deep breath. "Chains ready, Naruto," Mei whispered. "Swords ready, Chojuro. We kill him the second the door opens." Mei Terumi didn't even try to turn the handle. With enough force to split solid iron, she reared back and kicked the hefty oak doors. In a flurry of dust and flying wood, the doors blasted inward and crashed into the middle of the Mizukage's office. The only source of light in the enormous space was the war's flames that burned beyond the windows that reached the ceiling. Yagura stood in front of the glass. The fourth Mizukage held a stick with a big green blossom on the end. He was little, no taller than Naruto. However, the pressure radiating from his body was catastrophic. The Three Tails chakra permeated the entire space, making it difficult to breathe. Yagura looked away. His lifeless, pale purple eyes stared through the strike team as though they were already dead. "Traitors," Yagura muttered. He made no hand gestures, he simply swung his staff. The flooring gave way to a huge, jagged wave of solid sea coral that tore through the office at breakneck speed. "Vanguard," said Mei. Swinging Haramekure, Chojuro entered the doorway. The coral wave was shattered into dust by the brilliant blue chakra hammer. However, Yagura had already started to move. The Mizukage disappeared and reappeared just over the adolescent before Chojuro could regain his position. Yagura was already surrounded by a thick, seething layer of crimson Biju chakra, which manifested as two enormous, ghostly red tails. He used the force of a falling boulder to drive his staff down. The blue-haired youth crashed into the wall as Chojuro raised his broadsword to block, but the force of the blow broke the stone floor beneath him. "Chojuro," exclaimed Ao, his Byakugan straining to keep up with the Mizukage's horrifying pace. Mei didn't think twice. She took a deep breath and released a torrent of caustic, boiling mist. "Release the boil." The remaining coral was melted and the paint on the walls was stripped away as the acidic cloud engulfed the middle of the space. However, a roar tore through the fog. Yagura emerged unscathed from the acid cloud, shielded by the Three Tails' thick red chakra. A dark, skeletal demonic figure was emerging from the peeling skin on his face. His fist formed a sphere of thick, black chakra as he lunged directly for Mei. A little-tailed beast bomb. He moved too quickly. Mei was unable to weave the signs in time. A tiny figure scurried across the space. Naruto hurled himself straight into the path of the Mizukage. He made no attempt to avoid the devastating blow. He let out a deep, guttural scream as he braced his bare feet on the stone and felt the full, excruciating brunt of Yagura's charge against his injured ribs. With a thunderous shriek of grinding metal, 4 massive golden chains burst from Naruto's spine. The chains whipped about Yagura at close range. They violently wrapped around the Mizukage's limbs, torso, and throat as they smashed into the seething red chakra and bit down. Blinding heat ignited the old Uzumaki sealing formulae. The physical world disappeared as soon as the golden iron clamped down and suppressed the beast's chakra. The smell of smoke, the shouting rebels, and the burning office were all gone. Suddenly, Naruto found himself hovering in ankle-deep water in a completely black nothingness. Yagura was standing across from him. However, they were not engaged in combat. The walls of their thoughts had been destroyed by the collision of their chakra, the chains, and their shared burden as Jinchuriki. A powerful flood of flashes of painful memories swept over their interconnected consciousness, bleeding between them. Yagura noticed it. He could feel the Hidden Leaf Village's oppressive heat. He noticed a young, blonde-haired Naruto sitting by himself on a swing, staring at a group of villagers whose eyes were only full of poisonous, unadulterated hatred. Sitting in a school and staring up at a teacher named Iruka, who made an effort to be kind but whose eyes were always displaying a profound, barely contained grief and wrath over the demon who killed his parents, hurt him, Yagura sensed the boy's frantic need to be accepted as a human being, only to be deceived. With the pilfered scroll, he experienced the horrible night in the woods. The knowledge that, to them, he was merely a monster. Then, when no one from his village arrived to save him, the fighting pit slavers snapped the heavy, cold iron collar around his throat, leaving him in a state of crushing despair. And Naruto saw Yagura's truth in the same heartbeat. Naruto felt the mist village's icy stone. He experienced the searing, excruciating anguish of a huge turtle demon being crammed into his screaming, youthful body. The weight of the entire village's demands that he control the beast or face death crushed him. Naruto then noticed the puppeteer. A figure in a mask with one bright red eye suddenly and terrifyingly entered the room. He could feel the heavy, black strands of genjutsu piercing Yagura's mind. As his own body was taken over, he sensed the Mizukage's utter, screaming horror. Unable to stop it, Yagura had been forced to watch from behind his own eyes as his hands commanded the destruction of his house, the purges of the bloodlines, and the slaughter of his comrades. The deluge of recollections ceased. Staring at each other, the two guys stood in the dark, ankle-deep water. They were naked. Less than a second had gone by in the real world. With a strong chakra spike lying in his palm, Naruto's hand was raised, poised to break the Mizukage's neck. A fatal strike that would put an end to the blood mist forever. However, Naruto gazed into Yagura's lifeless, pallid eyes. The pit fighter witnessed someone who truly knew what it was like to be in a cage for the first time in his life. They were identical. They were merely tools utilized by ruthless individuals who desired the demons within them, and they were despised by the entire world. Naruto's hand shuddered. The deadly chakra in his hand subsided. He put his hand down. Ao yelled from the doorway, "Naruto, strike!" as he saw the ideal opening, his Byakugan igniting. Naruto remained motionless. He remained motionless, the Mizukage securely bound by his shining golden chains, which prevented the masked man from exerting any influence. He saw the tormented prisoner underneath the illusion and the monster. Naruto muttered, "You're not the owner," with a deep, heavy sadness in his hoarse voice. "You're in a cage, too." The crackling of the fires burning in the city below was the only sound to break the oppressive silence in the Mizukage's office. In the middle of the broken room, Naruto stood still. The fourth Mizukage was pinned to the stone floor by his four shining golden chains, which were securely wrapped around Yagura. The Uzumaki seals suppressed the three tails suffocating chakra. Yagura had no defense. "Naruto!" Ao yelled as he advanced while brandishing his kunai. "What are you doing? I gave you an order, end it." Naruto avoided the scarred veteran's gaze. His bright, soulless eyes remained fixed on the little, paralyzed man in his shackles. Like wet smoke, the memory of the icy, ankle-deep water in their shared mindscape lingered in his mind. "He's not doing it on purpose," Naruto replied in a flat, hoarse voice. "There are black strings in his head. Someone else is pulling them. A man with a mask and a single red eye." With a dark, deep anguish in her emerald eyes, Mei Terumi dropped her kunai a little. "We already know, Naruto. Ao saw the genjutsu in his cerebral pathways months ago. The man we knew died a long time ago. The illusion is too deep. We have to kill the vessel to stop the blood mist." Naruto gripped the chains more tightly. The youngster who had snapped a guard's neck a few days prior, the lad who had slain without hesitation in the battle pits, would not lift his hand. Naruto questioned, "Is there a way to break the strings?" As the Byakugan burst to life, Ao took a step forward, the veins surrounding his right eye swelling. "I can see the exact root of the illusion. If I strike the Tenketsu at the base of his skull and force my own chakra into his mind, I can shatter the genjutsu." "No," Naruto cut him off right away. The Byakugan was not necessary for him to recognize the threat. It was bleeding through the chains, as he could feel. "The turtle inside him is awake," Naruto said plainly as he fixed his gaze on Yagura's chest. "It hates the strings too. But if you hit him and shock his brain, the beast will panic. It will tear him apart from the inside before he even wakes up. The shock will kill him." Ao froze. The boy was correct, the seasoned shinobi understood. A Jinchuriki holding back a large, enraged-tailed beast would be torn to pieces by the rapid mental whiplash, yet a regular ninja might withstand the severe interruption of a well-ingrained illusion. Mei remarked quietly, "Then there is nothing we can do," as the terrible truth descended onto the space. "End his suffering, Naruto." "No," Naruto said once more. Suddenly, the room's air became extremely heated. Naruto did not pull out a weapon. He filled the golden chains encircling the Mizukage with his own enormous, dense Uzumaki chakra. A brilliant, pure light began to flare from the ancient sealing formulas engraved into the ethereal iron. Naruto narrowed his eyes and rasped, "The chains aren't just for holding beasts," putting all of his strength into the jutsu. "They're seals. They eat chakra." Naruto utilized the chains like a sponge rather than a forceful blow. Bypassing Yagura's skin and locking onto his chakra pathways, the flaming iron sunk a mere inch deeper into his body. Naruto reached through the bars and grasped the masked man's black, alien chakra. It retaliated. Rushing up the chains was a terrible, violent surge of pure malice that attempted to poison Naruto's own consciousness. However, the Uzumaki child had already made it through the cruel realities of his new life in the combat pits, the utter betrayal of his first home, and the crushing hatred of the Nine Tails. The misery he had already experienced was far worse than a single string of genjutsu. The foreign chakra was torn out by Naruto. Before the dark, parasitic chakra had even left Yagura's body, it was reduced to ash by the white-hot flames of the chains. The three tails were kept sedated by the systematic, unhurried extraction, which did not startle the Mizukage. The last remnant of the illusion broke with a loud, resonant hiss. The golden light of the chains faded back to a faint hum as Naruto exhaled deeply. Yagura gasped violently as she lay on the ground. The unseen weight disappeared from the fourth Mizukage's cranium, causing him to arch his back and cough forcefully. His eyes broke from their pale, lifeless purple hue to the horrified, frenzied clarity of a man awakening from a 10-year nightmare. Yagura glanced up at his dilapidated office's ceiling. 10 forced memories crashed into his consciousness, causing his chest to heave and tears to immediately form in his eyes. He recalled each purging, each and every execution. Trapped in silence behind his own eyes, he had been compelled to kill everybody. Yagura coughed out, I couldn't stop my hands, his voice breaking with an unadulterated, terrible pain. He glanced first at Mei and then at Ao. Mei, I couldn't stop them. Mei Terumi brought her kunai down. All that remained was a profound, worn-out sadness as the cage-level pressure flowing off her disappeared. Mei said, "We know, Yagura," and moved in closer. Ao saw the genjutsu. "We know it wasn't you." A ragged sob tore from Yagura's throat as he curled inward, his hands clutching his own hair. One mind could not handle the crushing weight of the Bloodmist's body count. "It doesn't matter," Yagura sobbed as his tiny body shook fiercely on the stone floor. His pale eyes begged Mei for an end as he glanced up at her. "The blood is still on my hands. My village is dead because of my weakness. Please, Mei. Pick up your blade. End it. I don't want to live with these ghosts." Mei paused. She gripped her kunai more tightly. For years, she had pictured herself standing over the despot who had murdered her companions, prepared to give the last blow. However, Naruto spoke before she could lift her arm. The youngster rasped, "Don't," breaking the oppressive hush in the room. Mei paused and glanced down at the pit fighter with red hair. Naruto remained motionless. The three tails remained submissive while his shining golden shackles held Yagura firmly to the ground. Naruto didn't scream or insist on it. He simply raised his lifeless, golden eyes to the rebel leader. "Don't kill him," Naruto muttered. He remembered the icy iron of the fighting pits as he looked down at his own wrists. He didn't hold the leash. He was just trapped in the dark. If you kill him now, you're just doing what the man with the red eye wanted. Near the entryway, Ao and Chojuro stood in stunned stillness. The youngster, groomed to be a merciless, heartless weapon, was pleading for forgiveness. Mei Terumi glanced at the sobbing Mizukage on the ground before turning to face the scared, disfigured youth who had just rescued him from the chasm. She exhaled deeply and tremblingly. Her fingers parted. With a loud clatter against the destroyed stone floor, the kunai fell out of her grasp. Mei whispered, "The blood mist ends today, Yagura," as she peered out the broken windows at the fires raging in the capital below. "There has already been too much blood spilled in this land. I will not add yours to the river." She looked across at Ao. "Captain," Mei said, her voice returning to the calm, authoritative tone of a leader. "Signal the vanguard. Tell them the Mizukage has surrendered, and the genjutsu is broken. The civil war is over." After a few while of staring at her, Ao's scarred face lit up with a furious, sincere smile. He made a deep bow. "Yes, Lady Cage." Mei eventually glanced back down at Naruto as Ao hurried to the broken window to send the flare. With a heavy, metallic hiss, the golden iron slid back into the boy's spine as he gently withdrew his chains. Yagura leaned forward into the rock, sobbing uncontrollably but no longer pleading for her demise. May knelt next to the youngster with the red hair in the debris. She remained silent. She didn't make a heroic speech or give meaningless compliments. She simply extended her arm and put a steady, soothing palm on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto glanced at his own hands. Tonight, they weren't coated in blood. He hadn't broken anyone for the first time since being removed from his house. During the combat, the balcony's thick oak doors were blown from their hinges. The chilly sea breeze instantly whipped Mai Terumi's auburn hair about her face as she got up and went outside onto the broken stone overlook. In the land of water, dawn was just starting to break. The capital's lingering smoke was broken by the pale morning light. The enormous courtyard beneath her was a sea of dirt, blood, and worn-out shinobi. With their weapons drawn, thousands of rebel fighters and Yagura's supporters waited in a bloody, tense standoff, awaiting the last order. Ao held a flare rifle as he stepped out onto the balcony next to Mai. He fired the shot. The entire city was illuminated by a dazzling white light that burst into the dawn sky. The global signal of surrender for a cage. The courtyard fell silent. The tower's destroyed balcony caught everyone's attention. Mai cast a downward glance toward her folks. She inhaled deeply, allowing her voice to be carried by the wind and reverberate off the capital's stone walls. Mai yelled, "The tyrant has fallen," in a voice full of unwavering, total power. The fourth Mizukage has surrendered. The illusion that poisoned his mind has been shattered. Lay down your weapons. The blood mist is dead. Nobody moved for 3 excruciating seconds. Then one rebel fell into the mud with his blood-stained sword. He dropped to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably while covering his face in his hands. Then someone else let go of their firearm. Next, a loyalist. In a matter of seconds, the courtyard was filled with the loud sound of thousands of kunai and swords striking the stone. The rebel troops let out a huge, deafening yell. It was a naked, unadulterated discharge of years of pain rather than a battle cry. Her name was sung by them. Every voice in the courtyard was yelling the same thing as it began in the back and rolled forward like a tidal wave. Mai. Lady Mai. 5th Mizukage, 5th Cage. For a time, Mai closed her eyes, allowing the title to weigh heavily on her. She had prevailed. However, the triumph was brittle. Chojuro emerged from the office's shadows onto the balcony and held Yagura's weeping, tired body. The 4th Mizukage leaned heavily against the blue-haired swordsman, scarcely able to stand. The applause in the courtyard below abruptly stopped. In the front row, a rebel commander's face twisted into a grimace of primal fury as he pointed up at the balcony. The commander cried out, "He's still breathing," in an anguished tone. "He slaughtered my family. Why is he breathing? Kill him." In an instant, the crowd went wild. A sudden, terrible bloodlust took the place of the ecstasy. Men scrambled in the mud to retrieve their swords after dropping them. In a panic, the loyalists raised their own weapons to protect themselves. A slaughter was ready to break out from the precarious calm. "Execute him!" screamed the throng. Blood for blood. Yagura accepted the hatred and closed his eyes. Leaning away from Chojuro, he was prepared to jump from the balcony in order to placate the crowd and prevent another altercation. Silence. Mai struck the stone balcony with her foot. The entire courtyard was engulfed by a tremendous, oppressive wave of cage-level chakra. The front lines were brought to their knees by the intense pressure, which put an immediate end to the riot. Mai glared down at the troops as she moved to the edge of the balcony. Mai yelled, "I said the blood mist is dead." With fiery emerald eyes. "If we execute a broken, defeated man today, then we are no better than the butchers we just overthrew. He was controlled by an enemy of this village. The true monster is still out there. I will not start my reign by feeding this village more blood." Fearful of her strength, the throng became hushed, yet the intense animosity persisted. They required justice. They had to get rid of the 4th Mizukage. Mai pivoted and glanced at Yagura. A ghost haunting his own body, the little man appeared hollow. "Yagura," Mai stated in a stern, official tone, "for the crimes committed under your reign, and for the weakness that allowed our enemies to use you, you are hereby stripped of your title." With tears streaming down his cheeks, Yagura nodded slowly. "You are banished from the hidden mist village, and exiled from the land of water," Mai ruled, making sure the irate crowd below heard her. "You will leave these shores today. If you ever set foot in this country again, you will be struck down. Go. Live with your ghosts somewhere else." It was a terrible penalty. Yagura would become a nomadic outcast if he lost his house, his title, and his people. However, he would be alive and have his own thoughts for the first time in 10 years. Yagura lowered his head till his forehead made contact with the chilly balcony stone. "Thank you, Fifth Mizukage, Yagura muttered. Naruto watched the conversation in the darkness just inside the destroyed office. His damaged hands were at his sides as he stood silently. He watched as Mei's order was accepted by the enormous, irate throng. He observed Yagura's survival. Now, Mei Terumi was the fifth Mizukage. She had complete power, a village, and an army. Naruto could not see a new master, though, as he observed her standing in the early light. He felt the black bruises where the heavy iron collar of the combat pits had once rested on his own neck. He was purchased by Mei. He had been fed by her. She had directed him toward her adversaries. However, she had listened to him when he refused to carry out her explicit command to kill. The leash has vanished. He turned to face Yagura, the tiny, shattered receptacle for the three tails, who could now leave the tribe that had despised him. Naruto felt a deep, calm awareness sink into his chest. He was not a shinobi of mist. He wasn't a shinobi from Leaf. He was a Jinchuriki. And no one was holding his chain for the first time in his life. Serving the cage from the balcony was not a requirement for him. At last, he was able to make his own decisions. By the time night descended upon the land of water, the capital's fires had finally subsided into flickering embers. The dense, suffocating fog had come back, engulfing the beach as it rolled off the water. Naruto stood on the damp wooden planks near the edge of the city's secret docks, gazing out at the dark lake. He was dressed in a plain, black travel cloak that he had stolen from the armory. There was hardly much for him to pack, he didn't. Behind him, there were footsteps on the wood. Mei Terumi whispered, "Leaving so soon?" Naruto pivoted. The fifth Mizukage was still dressed in her regular battle clothes rather than her cage robes, but her green eyes were obviously tired from the day. She approached the dock's edge and stood next to him, gazing out into the mist. "I broke the strings," Naruto stated in a flat, hoarse voice. "The mission is over." "It is," Mei concurred. She produced a bulky bag of ryo from her pouch and extended it toward him. "You earned this, Naruto. You saved this village from destroying itself today. But I know you didn't do it for the mist." Naruto glanced at the cash before turning to face her. He didn't immediately accept it. "You smashed the gates and pulled me out of that pit," Naruto sternly reminded her. "You saved my life. I owed you blood. That's why I fought for you." Mei's face softened into something very sorrowful and maternal. She carefully grasped his wounded hand and placed the bulky coin pouch in his palm. "I didn't break you out of a cage just to put a different leash on you," Mei calmly reminded him. "You don't owe me a body count, Naruto. You belong to yourself now. The debt is paid." Giving him the room and deference of an equal, she released his hand and stepped back. "You are always welcome in the hidden mist. You have a home here, if you want it." Mei spoke over the sound of the sea. "If you ever get tired of running," she said. Naruto held onto the currency pouch. He had no idea how to express gratitude. It was something he had never had to do before. So he only nodded respectfully to her once. He was left alone in the mist as Mei turned back toward the recuperating metropolis with a warm smile. A small, unmarked trading skiff bobbed in the dark water at the very end of the docks, far from the rebel patrols. Yagura covered his face with a thick gray hood as he stood on the deck. He was no longer wearing a cage hat. He had no village. He was merely a ghost leaving his own nation by the back door. He started to untie the ship by reaching for the mooring rope, but he stopped when he heard boots thudding heavily on the deck behind him. Yagura did not look back. "You're very quiet, Uzumaki," Naruto said. "I try to be," as he emerged from the dense mist. At last, Yagura turned to face the red-haired lad who had broken his nightmare with pale purple eyes. Without the ominous atmosphere of his office, the former Mizukage appeared minuscule. He simply appeared worn out. With a hollow voice, Yagura questioned, "Did Mei send you to make sure I actually leave?" "No, I don't owe her anymore," Naruto said. His bright eyes met Yagura's as he approached. "I came because of what I saw in your head." Yagura stiffened, a palpable tremor coursing through his diminutive body. "You saw 10 years of slaughter. Which part?" "The dark," was Naruto's direct response. Naruto squinted as he attempted to put together the shattered memories he had extracted from the chains. "Before the strings broke. I saw the masked man with the red eye. But he wasn't alone. He was wearing a black cloak. It had red clouds on it." Yagura's throat constricted. Expecting the shadows themselves to leap out at them, he peered around the deserted docks. Yagura said, "Akatsuki," the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "What is that?" "A mercenary group. Or at least, that's what they pretend to be to the rest of the world," Yagura said. his voice quivering a little as he held onto the ship's wooden railing. "The masked man who controlled me. He's part of them. The genjutsu kept me trapped, but I could still hear his thoughts sometimes. Echoes of his plans." With serious pale eyes, Yagura turned to face Naruto. "They don't care about the Mist Village, Naruto. They care about the beast inside me," Yagura said him. "They're gathering power. Recruiting missing nin. And soon, they're going to start hunting. They want the tailed beasts. All 9 of them." On the deck, Naruto remained still. Suddenly, the ocean breeze seemed much colder. The enormous, irate fox imprisoned in the cage behind his ribs was on his mind. The Leaf Village, who despised him for it, came to mind. Yagura, who had been abducted and exploited to demolish his own house, crossed his mind. "There are others like us," Naruto murmured. 7 more? "Yes," Yagura said with a hesitant nod. "Scattered across the nations. Most of them are just like we were. Treated as weapons, hated by their own people. Sitting in the dark, blind to the fact that monsters in black cloaks are coming to butcher them." Naruto glanced at his own hands. At last, the severe bruises from the combat pit iron were beginning to heal. He was fully aware of what it was like to be abandoned in the dark, waiting for an unfulfilled rescue. "Someone has to help them," Naruto declared. It wasn't a heroic proclamation. It was simply an indisputable reality. The Jinchuriki would not be shielded by the communities. The cage would either utilize them or imprison them. The ships needed to be alerted if they were to withstand the crimson clouds. Startled, Yagura gazed at him. "Help them? Naruto, we are hunted men. I am an exiled tyrant, and you are a missing nin. If we step foot in another great nation, we'll be killed." Naruto replied, "I survived the pits," as he stepped fully onto the boat and placed his little bag on the deck. "You survived the red eye. The chains are off. We aren't going to be prey anymore." With his golden eyes blazing with a silent, unwavering resolve, Naruto gazed at the former Mizukage. "We're going to find the others," Naruto resolved. Yagura glanced first at the boy and then at the vast, black ocean in front of them. The deep anguish on the former cage's face finally gave way to a tiny, sincere grin. He truly had a mission of his own for the first time in 10 years. The thick mooring line splashed into the Black Sea as Yagura turned and unfastened it. Yagura took the helm and said, "All right then, Uzumaki," as the ship gradually moved away from the docks and vanished into the dense fog. "Let's go bite the hand that holds the leash." Silently, the small commerce skiff navigated the icy, dark waters of the Eastern Sea. The oppressive mist of the land of water gradually started to lift behind them, revealing the vast ocean beneath a dazzling starry sky. Naruto was off the map for the first time in his life. Anbu patrols, combat pit barriers, and cage commands were all absent. Just the sharp chill of the sea breeze and the steady crash of the waves against the wooden hull. Sitting cross-legged close to the ship's bow, Naruto watched the dark ocean pass by with his golden eyes. The excitement of the uprising ultimately gave way to a bone-deep tiredness as his injured ribs pained with each breath. Yagura sat at the tiller at the back of the skiff, his gray traveling cloak drawn snugly around his petite frame to protect him from the cold seas. He spent a long time observing the boy with the red hair. Yagura said, "When we fought in my office," barely raising his voice over the wind, "when you threw yourself in front of my attack, I felt its chakra bleed through your skin. The 9 tails." Naruto remained motionless. He simply glanced at his own hands. Yagura said, "Have you spoken to it?" The former Mizukage was one of the few individuals in history to tame a tailed beast. Thus he was intimately familiar with the sensation of that raw, boiling red chakra. Naruto rasped, once, in a flat voice, "When I jumped off a cliff in the Leaf." In the darkness, he recalled the rusting iron bars. He recalled the sensation of falling freely, the sound of the wind in his ears, and the oppressive heat of the fox's breath. Naruto went on, "It hates me," while gazing out to sea. "It told me it wants my heart to stop beating so the seal breaks. It wants me to die so it can scatter to the winds and be free." Naruto cautiously flipped his hands over and gazed at his faded knuckle scars. "But it gave me its chakra anyway," Naruto said. "It told me it decided to stay because it wanted to watch me become a monster. It wanted to watch me break more people." Yagura exhaled softly, trembling. Suddenly, the air over the sea felt cooler. He could comprehend a tailed beast's malice, but the 9 tails' brutal, sadistic brutality was a different type of terror. He saw how much harmful weight Naruto was carrying by himself as he examined the boy's wounded back. Yagura said, "They are all angry, Uzumaki," expressing a somber unity. They are ancient, sentient forces of nature that humans decided to stuff into meat cages to fight our petty wars. You'd be angry too. The fox wanted you to be a monster because that's all the world has ever treated it as. Yagura's pale eyes hardened as he grabbed the wooden tiller. But we can't focus on the beasts inside us right now. We need to focus on the ones out here. Naruto turned to face Yagura and shifted his weight on the wooden platform. The other 7, Naruto stated succinctly. You were a cage. Do you know where they are? As he mentally sorted through 10 years of highly classified intelligence, Yagura sat back and his visage darkened. The beasts are strictly guarded military secrets, Yagura clarified. But I was the Mizukage. Even trapped behind the illusion, my mind was still processing the Anbu tracking reports placed on my desk every single day. With his golden eyes fixed on the former Mizukage, Naruto waited silently. The hidden cloud holds 2 of them, Yagura remarked. The 8 tails, Killer Bee, and the 2 tails, Yugito ni. But we cannot go there. The cloud is an impenetrable fortress built into the mountains, and the Raikage is notoriously paranoid. If 2 rogue Jinchuriki show up at his front gates uninvited to talk to his ultimate weapons, he will obliterate us on sight. It's suicide. Without disputing the tactical reasoning, Naruto inquired, who's the next one? The 6 tails, Yagura replied, lowering his voice a little. His name is Utakata. He's a rogue ninja from my own village. Before the rebellion, my hunter Nin tracked his trail heading toward the borders of the Land of Fire and the Land of Hot Water. If the Red Clouds are starting their hunt, a rogue vessel with no village protection is going to be their very first target. Then we have to find Utakata before they do, Naruto concluded. How do we get there? Yagura gazed up at the stars, mentally tracking their trajectory. The most direct route is landing on the eastern coast of the Land of Fire. But we can't dock there, Yagura said. The Leaf Village has heavy Anbu patrols guarding their coastline. If they catch a missing nin from their own village traveling with a banished Mizukage, they will execute us or lock us in the deepest cell they have. Naruto scowled. Then we go around. We go under their radar, Yagura concurred. He gestured toward a group of far-off shadows on the horizon, pointing slightly southwest. There is a small, impoverished island nation just off the coast of the Land of Fire. The Land of Waves. They don't have a hidden ninja village, which makes it a blind spot. Naruto questioned, why there? Because right now, it's chaotic, Yagura said. They are building a great bridge to connect the island to the mainland. It's drawing in heavy civilian shipping and trade disputes. 2 refugees in a small skiff can easily slip into the civilian ports unnoticed. From there, we cross the bridge directly into the Land of Fire without tripping the coastal Anbu sensors. Naruto got up and moved to the ship's bow to gaze southward. The prospect of slipping right under the nose of the Leaf Village appealed to the practical survivor in him, even though the chill of the ocean breeze pierced through his scavenged cloak. The Land of Waves, Naruto muttered to himself, set a course. The small ship turned south in the dark as Yagura adjusted the tiller, the sail catching the chilly night breeze. The skiff sailed softly into a congested, run-down civilian port in the Land of Waves by the time the sun rose. The docks were a disorganized jumble of traders, building materials for a huge, partially constructed bridge in the distance, and helpless bystanders. Naruto and Yagura snuck off the boat and disappeared into the morning bustle, concealed by their bulky gray traveling cloaks. They made their way directly to the island's interior, which was covered in thick, foggy forests. Like ghosts, they moved through the tall canopy. There was no sound from Naruto's bare feet hitting the bark. Naruto abruptly stopped around an hour into the forest. He raised a hand while crouching on a thick limb. Silently landing next to him, Yagura's pale eyes scanned the mist. A patrol? No, Naruto muttered as his golden eyes narrowed. It's loud, too much wasted energy. The distinct noises of physical effort reverberated through the dense trees in the silent woods. The sound of a body hitting the ground was followed by a loud, reverberating crack and heavy footfall charging up wood. Yagura and Naruto sneaked through the canopy and looked down onto a large clearing. The area was occupied by 4 leaf shinobi. A tall man with silver hair and a forehead protector pulled down over his left eye was reading a small orange book while leaning casually on a tree stump. Hitaki Kakashi. Although he appeared at ease, his only visible eye kept darting from the pages to follow the pale lad seated a short distance away. Naruto had only been gone for 2 months. Danzo Shimura had not wasted a day since they had lost their most powerful weapon. In order to keep a close check on the Sharingan, he had promptly added his own root agent, Sai, to Team 7's vacant roster. The boy with the phony smile was exactly what Kakashi recognized. he worked as a spy. A girl with pink hair dangled her legs from a high tree 20 feet above Kakashi, gazing down at the clearing. Sakura's inherent chakra control greatly outperformed that of her teammates, and she had perfected the exercise on her first attempt. Sai lazily sketched on a scroll while standing perfectly horizontal on a nearby trunk, defying gravity without exerting any effort. He had no trouble at all. The boy with the Uchiha crest on his back was the only one in the dirt. With his chest heaving, Sasuke gazed angrily at a tall pine tree. He ran vertically up the bark, channeling chakra into his feet as he charged toward the trunk. He reached precisely 10 feet before he crashed back into the mud due to the bark splintering violently beneath his boots. "You fell again, Sasuke," Sai said. His painted smile fell short of his black eyes, yet his voice was courteous. "I read in the village files the Uchiha were natural prodigies. Was the file incorrect, or is this particular pine tree just exceptionally formidable?" Wiping mud from his cheek, Sasuke forced himself out of the soil. His dark eyes briefly flashed crimson as the Sharingan ignited, and he looked up at the pale youngster. Sasuke spat, "Shut up, fake," his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "Or I'll pull you down here and cut your tongue out." Sakura instantly fell from her lofty perch and landed in between them. "Sai, stop antagonizing him. You're supposed to be our teammate." Sai cocked his head, his smile unwavering. "I am simply making an observation, Sakura. The village elders assigned me to this squad to balance the numbers after your classmate turned traitor. I just want to ensure my new team is functional." Sakura winced. In an instant, the intense rage vanished from her face and was replaced with a crushing, silent shame. Instead of meeting Sai's gaze, she averted her gaze and gazed down at the muck. The youngster who had just disappeared into the darkness was the noisy, desperate boy she used to scream at every day at the academy. Sasuke's jaw tightened to the point of popping, yet he remained silent. A dark, resentful frown replaced the scarlet in his eyes. Neither of them spoke up to defend the lost classmate, even though they detested the pallid replacement. Naruto looked down at them from the canopy. His chest felt a slight, illusory constriction. The betrayer. The words lingered in the hazy atmosphere. The night in the forest, Mizuki, and the truth about the fox had all been kept a secret by the village elders. All they did was fabricate a convenient story. After stealing a forbidden scroll, Naruto Uzumaki left the village. To them, he was a criminal, not a lost child. For a brief moment, a shadow of the boisterous, frantic youth he once was erupted, an ancient, suppressed urge compelling him to leap down, yell the truth at the Uchiha, and attempt to win the pink-haired girl over. But the cold, heavy weight of the battle pit smothered the impulse almost instantly. He glanced at the pallid boy seated next to him. When he plunged off the cliff, the hidden leaf was still spinning. They just put the broken piece back, called him a monster, and carried on. At last, Kakashi closed his small orange book down in the clearing. Like a scalpel, the sharp sound sliced through the mounting tension. "Yes, yes. Let's remember we have a bridge builder to protect tomorrow," Kakashi replied. His voice was sluggish, but there was a deadly, uncompromising warning in his visible eye. "Save the killing intent for Gado's mercenaries, boys. Sai, focus on your scroll. Sasuke, try pooling the chakra in the center of your soul, not the heel." For a brief, suspicious moment, Kakashi's eyes swept across the dense canopy above them. Yagura and Naruto stopped breathing. They blended in perfectly with the forest's natural dampness to conceal their signatures. Kakashi glanced back down at his book after a long, uncomfortable moment. As the Uchiha retreated for another running start, Naruto silently questioned, "What is he doing?" While pointing at Sasuke. "Why does he keep breaking the wood?" Glancing at the child with red hair, Yagura realized how peculiar a typical genin education must appear to a pit fighter. It's the basic tree climbing exercise. A fundamental lesson to build steady chakra control. He's pushing too much energy into his feet. "Ao didn't teach me this," Naruto said in a flat tone. In a violent coastal storm, he recalled sitting cross-legged. The leaf training was quieter. You don't strike the surface like a hammer. You just let the water pool to create suction. Yagura exhaled softly. Naruto had been trained by expert assassins in a combat zone rather than being taught how to be a genin. The leaf prodigy appeared to Naruto as a boisterous, awkward youngster attempting to force a lock rather than pick it. Yagura muttered, "The silver-haired man is Kakashi of the Sharingan, identifying the notorious Third War mercenary. He is extremely dangerous. If the leaf has an elite squad operating in waves, the border crossing into the land of fire will be on high alert. We shouldn't push our luck today." Naruto said. Then we wait. We wait, Yagura said, gazing farther into the swamps of the island with pale eyes. Let Kakashi finish whatever mission brought him here. While they stay busy, we train. The leaf exercise taught you static control. The cliffs taught you vertical control. Now, I'm going to teach you fluid control. Naruto averted his golden, hollow eyes from the group he was once a member of. He didn't need them, and neither did the hidden leaf. The red ruin needed to finish its purpose. Fluid control, Naruto murmured again. Yes, Yagura replied as she vanished back into the canopy's shadows. Before we hunt the six tails, you are going to learn how to walk on water. The red-haired lad left his former life far behind and followed the former Mizukage farther into the fog without turning around. Thick, tangled mangrove roots and murky, sluggish water strangled the deepest wetlands of the land of waves. The air was heavy with the smell of salt and decaying flora. Yagura observed Naruto standing at the brink of a large, dark pool while standing on a patch of comparatively dry moss. Yagura taught, the tree bark Kakashi is having his genin climb is solid, over the din of marsh insects. If you push too hard, the bark splinters, but the target remains stationary. Water does not forgive. Yagura moved straight onto the black pool's surface after stepping off the moss. His boots remained upright. His weight was well supported by the water, which only rippled outward from his soles. Water is in constant motion, Yagura said as she took a few careful, leisurely steps. If you use too little chakra, you sink. If you use too much, you don't just break the surface. You violently repel it, plunging yourself into the depths. You have to constantly adjust the chakra in your feet to match the shifting current beneath you. It is the ultimate test of sustained focus. He pointed at the pool as he made his way back to the moss. Show me what you have. Naruto acted without hesitation. The leaf on his forehead came back to him. He recalled the sea cliff's precipitous descent. Put the water in a pool. Make a suction. He stepped onto the swamp's surface and directed a continuous stream of his dense Uzumaki chakra into the soles of his bare feet. He stood on the water for a little moment. Then there was a little shift in the ambient current beneath his heel. In order to make up for it, Naruto automatically flared his chakra, treating the water like solid stone. Instead of splintering, the surface exploded. Naruto plunged waist deep into the icy muck as his dense chakra violently repelled him, sending a fountain of swamp water skyward. With his traveling cloak drenched and sticking to his injured ribs, Naruto stood in the murky water. He refrained from cursing. He refrained from thrashing. He simply examined the failure. Yagura observed from the bank. You treated it like a wall, in an analytical and uncaring tone. You pushed the current away instead of riding it. With his bare feet striking the moss, Naruto waded out of the mire. Squeezing the dirty water from his red hair, he fixed his concentrated gaze on the slowly disappearing waves in the pool. He did not summon the fox's poisonous, flaming chakra. He did not call forth the bulky, golden chains. He shut his eyes and concentrated only on the organic flow of his own reserves. Again, Naruto growled. He returned to the ocean. Before he could control the flow, he fell to his shins this time. He stepped out a third time after wading out and repositioning himself. Tightening his gray cloak around his shoulders, Yagura took a seat on a thick, bare mangrove root. He repeatedly saw the boy collapse. Naruto didn't express annoyance. An hour earlier, they had seen a suffering Uchiha, but he didn't act like that. He moved toward the water in a steady, frigid beat, doing this repeatedly until his body adapted to the flow. The splashing eventually ceased as the sun started to set, creating long, gory shadows across the swamp. Yagura raised her gaze. In the center of the pitch-black pool, Naruto stood. His bare feet were precisely level on the surface, but his garments were drenched in standing water. He was not sinking. The water was not being blasted away by him. His breathing was slow and deliberate, and his golden eyes were open, staring at the horizon. He had achieved equilibrium. Good, Yagura muttered. Now, walk to the other side. Pale light peeked through the dense fog as the moon hung high above the land of waves. Standing on the black pool's surface was Naruto. He was fighting now, not only standing. With each punch, he shifted his weight fiercely and delivered vicious, effective blows into the void. This time, he forced his chakra to balance on the undulating water beneath his bare feet while he performed the deadly, close-quarters fighting he had learned in the pits. The water rippled outward but remained solid each time he turned or kicked. He was getting the hang of the flow. After observing from the mossy bank for some time, Yagura got up and brushed the dirt from his gray cloak. Yagura responded, "Keep practicing," while covering his face with his hood. I'm going to the civilian port to find a tavern. I want real food, and I need to hear what rumors are bleeding out of the mainland. I'll bring some food back for you. Don't drown while I'm gone." With a simple grunt, Naruto struck the mist with a strong elbow. The youngster was left alone in the swamp as Yagura turned and disappeared into the trees. Hours went by. His damaged ribs hurt from the physical effort, but he persisted. Then he froze when he heard a soft rustle in the brush. His bright eyes focused on the tree line, but he did not call forth the chains. A figure emerged from the mist. It wasn't one of Gato's hired guns or Leaf Anbu. Carrying a small woven basket, a young man with long dark hair and a pale pink robe entered the moonlight. With his hands down, Naruto silently observed. The visitor was collecting herbs from the mangrove tree's exposed roots. The stranger stopped after a short while and saw the youngster with red hair standing motionless on top of the lake. The young man's face lit up with a soft, beguiling smile. "You'll catch a cold out here," the stranger replied quietly and smoothly. Naruto gazed. His bare feet finally touched the muddy bank as he crossed the pool's surface. His garments clung to his body as he stopped a few steps away. Naruto rasped in a harsh voice, "Why is a girl picking weeds in the dark? I heard there are mercenaries all over the island. You'll get killed out here." The stranger's smile remained fixed. "Are you training? You must be a shinobi. Why do you push yourself so hard? Is there someone precious to you?" "Priceless." The word sounded completely alien. The bloody arena came to Naruto's mind. He imagined Mei shattering his collar. He considered the 7 other imprisoned creatures that were waiting in the shadows, completely unaware of the crimson clouds that were pursuing them. "No," was Naruto's direct response. "Just people I need to find. People like me." The stranger's face softened into a sympathetic one. When a person has something important to protect, they can become truly strong. "I have someone precious to me, too. I am his tool, and I will keep him safe." Naruto's golden eyes squinted a little. He detested the term, tool. In order to stop the Mizukage from being a tool, he had just burned the strings out of Yagura's skull. He had a grim, distanced understanding of the stranger rather than a strong connection. Naruto had just broken his leash, yet they both understood how to bleed for a reason. The stranger continued to wear one with joy. With a slight bow, the stranger picked up the basket of woven herbs. The young man murmured, "I must go," and turned to face the deeper forest. "Good luck finding your people." After taking 2 feet, the guy stopped and gave a kind, mischievous smile as he looked back over his shoulder. "Oh, by the way, I'm a boy." Naruto froze. His golden eyes grew somewhat wider. His brow furrowed in silent, sincere bewilderment. He examined the delicate features, the long hair, and the pink kimono. That small blink of complete confusion was the loudest response he has made in months for a youngster whose emotions were buried behind layers of trauma and blood. As the boy disappeared into the dense fog, Naruto stood immobile on the moss, completely at a loss for words. The quiet of the swamp was broken 10 minutes later by the gentle thud of boots hitting the mud. Yagura emerged from the tree line with a bundle of heated, grease-stained paper. He stopped on the bank and studied the red-haired child, who was still gazing blankly into the deserted woods, with pale eyes. Yagura tossed the wrapped bundle of rice and grilled fish to Naruto and inquired, "Did something happen?" The thick, recognizable mask of the pit fighter fell back into place as Naruto caught the food and blinked the bewilderment away. "No, just a weed picker." Yagura didn't bring up the matter. He took out his own ration of food and sat down on a mangrove root. While eating, Yagura stated, "The civilian port is a mess," in a quiet voice. "Those mercenaries Kakashi mentioned in the forest are drinking themselves blind. They're bragging about an ambush they have planned for the bridge tomorrow. It's going to be a war zone by midday." Naruto nibbled into the cooked fish. "Does that mean we can't cross?" "No, it means Kakashi and those thugs are going to create the perfect distraction," Yagura said, his pale eyes glinting sharply and strategically. "The Leaf doesn't send ambu patrols this far south, which is why we picked this island. With a battle raging on the bridge, we can slip right past the chaos and into the land of fire without anyone looking our way." Naruto finished his meal and nodded slowly. "Did anyone in the taverns know about the 6 tails?" "Not by name," Yagura replied. "But I found a smuggler who just sailed down from the northern coast. He was complaining about a rogue ninja blowing explosive bubbles that melted right through the hull of a trading ship." Naruto gave up chewing. "Utakata. He's definitely moving toward the borders of the land of hot water," Yagura affirmed. "The red clouds might not be hunting in the open yet, but if Utakata keeps leaving a trail of melted ships, He is going to draw eyes we don't want him to draw. The Akatsuki will find him eventually. We need to get to him first. Yagura finished his rice and peered up at the moon through the mist. Eat up, Uzumaki, the former Mizukage muttered. We cross the bridge at dawn. The land of waves was choked. Dawn did not break over it. With his gray traveling cloak wrapped snugly over his shoulders, Naruto stood on the swamp's mossy edge. There was no sun when he gazed up at the sky. A huge, oppressive white wall had engulfed the island's normal, thin morning fog. A cold, angry force permeated the air, making it seem heavy and moist. With his pale eyes narrowing at the thick white veil, Yagura moved up next to him. Yagura muttered, "We are too late," in a somber tone. "This isn't weather. It's the hidden mist jutsu. The ambush on the bridge didn't wait for midday. It has already started." Naruto clenched his hands. "Then we move through the woods and cross beneath the bridge while they are fighting." Yagura gave a nod. "Keep your chakra completely suppressed. If whoever cast this mist senses us, we will be dragged right into the crossfire." Moving discreetly through the thick coastal forest, they exited the marsh and followed the main road that led to the bridge. Naruto could not see 10 feet ahead of him due to the dense fog. The silence was broken by a harsh, piercing sound about a mile from the coast. Breaking glass. A woman's horrified scream came right after. On a tree branch, Naruto came to a complete stop. A simple wooden home was underneath them, tucked up in a little clearing close to the lake. The front door's hinges had been kicked off. A struggling woman was being hauled out onto the porch by her hair by two guys dressed in shoddy, mismatched armor. "Let her go," exclaimed a tiny, terrified voice. Clutching a chunk of firewood, a small youngster with a bucket hat bolted from the home. He sobbed in fear as he swung it furiously at the men. The child was knocked tumbling into the mud as one of the thugs merely chuckled and backhanded him across the face. Naruto glanced down at the boy who was shaking. He recalled the chilly fighting pit floor. He recalled the guards betting on his life while laughing. He detested anyone who treated others like defenseless victims. The boy with the red hair fell from the canopy without saying anything. The mercenary approached the sobbing youngster in the mud while brandishing a short sword on the porch. "Little brat. The boss said we only needed the woman as a hostage, but I think'll just." He didn't complete the phrase. Without a sound, Naruto landed just behind him. The pit fighter did not flare his chakra or wield a kunai. He just seized the back of the man's head, gave him a severe twist, and slammed his face on the wooden porch post. The wood broke. Unconscious, the mercenary fell to the ground like a sack of wheat. With shocked eyes, the second thug let go of the woman's hair. When he reached for his blade, Naruto was already in motion. In an instant, he closed the gap and struck the man in the stomach with a vicious, crushing knee. Naruto whacked the back of the thug's neck with the edge of his hand as he collapsed, struggling to breathe. Beside his colleague, the second mercenary fell to the ground in a heap. It took less than 3 seconds to complete the fight. The red-haired youngster was the object of the woman's terrified gaze as she scrambled backward on the porch. With his eyes wide, the lad wearing the bucket hat lay in the mud, clutching his damaged cheek while staring at the stranger wearing the bulky gray cloak. Naruto ignored the unconscious bodies. He looked at the sobbing youngster with his bright, soulless eyes. "Who are they?" Naruto said in a harsh, cold voice. "Why are they attacking your house?" With a sniffle, the boy gestured to the sea with a shaking finger. "They work for Gato, a horrible businessman who took over our island. My grandpa is building the bridge to save us. Gato sent his whole army to kill him today. He sent a demon ninja to kill the people protecting him." Yagura landed elegantly beside Naruto with a gentle thump. The former Mizukage quickly deduced the intelligence from the boy's sobbing expression. "A demon," Yagura said again, staring at the oppressive white wall above the lake with narrowed pale eyes. "Zabuza Momochi. The demon of the hidden mist. He is one of the 7 ninja swordsmen. He must be the one who cast the fog over the bridge." Naruto scowled. "You know him?" Yagura whispered. "He was my shinobi," as a thick shadow passed over his young face. "Years ago, before I was broken out of the genjutsu, Zabuza staged a coup. He tried to assassinate me to end the Blood Mist era. When he failed, he was forced to flee and become a mercenary." Yagura moved past Naruto, staring at the far-off, foggy bridge. He appeared completely determined for a boy who had been escaping his past for the past few weeks. Yagura stated, "He rebelled because of the monster I was forced to be," with a quiet, painful guilt in his voice. "I owe him this. I need to see the damage I cause." Naruto observed the X cage. He refrained from arguing. He only glanced at the youngster in the mud before returning his attention to the unconscious goons lying on the ground. "Let's go to the bridge," Naruto muttered. By the time Naruto and Yagura arrived to the incomplete bridge, a dense, swirling white fog had fully engulfed the concrete expanse. The demon of the hidden mist's suffocating purpose to kill was heavy in the chilly air. The sound of steel ringing against steel reverberated over the sea through the mist. Somewhere deep within the white, blind wall, Kakashi was already engaged in combat with Zabuza. A huge dome of thick, frozen mirrors protruded from the concrete close to the bridge's center. Yagura stopped and looked toward the source of the heaviest water chakra through the mist with pale eyes. Yagura whispered, "Zabuza is further down," while holding onto the hem of his gray robe. "I am going to find him." Naruto said, "I'll handle the ice," as his golden eyes stared at the frozen dome. With a single nod, Yagura silently disappeared into the mist. Naruto moved in closer, hiding his presence entirely. He approached the dome's edge and peered through the spaces between the tall ice mirrors. The stone within had bloodstains on it. Dozens of long, thin needles protruded from Sai's pale arms and legs as he lay slumped against the concrete. He was totally immobile, yet he was still breathing. Sasuke Uchiha was panting violently a few feet away, his legs shaking. A thin trail of blood trickled from a gash on his cheek, and his garments were ripped. The blood red of his Sharingan whirled madly as his dark eyes raced around the dome in an attempt to find his assailant. A shinobi wearing a white porcelain mask and a dark green haori moved frighteningly quickly between the mirrors. From the fog's shadows, Naruto observed. He could spin around with ease. The pale spy bleeding on the ground didn't concern him, and he had no allegiance to the Leaf Village. However, he glanced at Sasuke. He recalled hearing the pale youngster accuse him of being a traitor while he was sitting in the trees a few hours prior. Sakura had averted her gaze out of shame. However, Sasuke had not referred to him as a monster. Sasuke had not cast a hateful glance at his recollection. The Uchiha had just appeared resentful and furious against the world, bearing a dark, heavy burden that Naruto could well comprehend. Pulling 3 needles between his fingers, the masked ninja emerged halfway from a mirror just above Sasuke in the ice dome. A quiet, muffled voice said, "You fought well, from behind the mask, but it is over." Gritting his teeth, Sasuke raised a shaking kunai. His legs were too injured to avoid. He prepared for the final blow. The needles were thrown by the masked ninja. Naruto didn't even consider it. He just used the deadly, refined reflexes of the fighting pits to move. Moving quicker than Sasuke's eyes could follow, he blasted inside the dome. Stepping squarely in front of the Uchiha, Naruto raised an arm covered in the thick material of his gray cloak. Thwack! 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 The 3 needles stopped just shy of Naruto's skin after penetrating deeply into the thick wool of his sleeve. Naruto thrust his other hand forward before the enemy in the mask could escape back into the ice. His palm exploded violently into a hefty, shining golden chain. The masked ninja was standing in a mirror when it crashed into it, shooting across the dome like a powerful viper. The enemy was forced to jump out of the frame and fell hard on the concrete when the Uzumaki chakra's sheer, crushing force broke the frozen glass into 1,000 gleaming fragments. The heavy hood of Naruto's cloak slipped backward and fell entirely upon his shoulders due to the sudden movement and the blast of chilly air. The drab morning light caught the bright, blood-red hair. Sasuke gasped for air. He fixed upon the boy in front of him with his whirling Sharingan. He noticed that each cheek was scarred with 3 distinct, jagged whisker markings. Across an academy classroom, he glimpsed the profile of a face he had gazed at for 4 years. However, the boisterous, frantic child wearing the orange jumpsuit had vanished. The boy in front of him carried himself with the calm, terrible stillness of a seasoned murderer and had icy, empty golden eyes. Sasuke's voice was almost audible as he dropped his kunai, his palm trembling. Naruto. Naruto avoided turning to face the Uchiha. His golden eyes were fixed solely on the ninja in a mask who was hiding in the mist. "Stay on the ground," Naruto commanded. He didn't wait for Sasuke to respond. Already in motion, the masked ninja leapt from the shattered concrete into an intact mirror on the other side of the dome. The opponent quickly started bouncing between the reflections, encircling Naruto and the injured Leaf Genin in a disorienting ring of motion. Needles poured down from all sides. Naruto did not use hand gestures. He remained calm. He simply breathed, observing the minute changes in the chilly air. A dozen needles were deflected into the pavement as he swung his arm, causing the golden chain to swing in a broad, furious arc. To protect Sasuke and Sai, he moved into the path of the others, allowing the jagged steel to pierce the hardened flesh of his arms and the thick wool of his cloak. The agony didn't even cause him to flinch. These needles were merely bee stings in comparison to the fighting pits. Sasuke observed the golden chain tearing through the air from the blood-stained concrete, his Sharingan spinning. What he was seeing was beyond his comprehension. Naruto was not fighting in the academy's awkward, boisterous manner. There was no wasted energy in his motions, which were terrifyingly tight. When the masked ninja saw that Naruto's ranged attacks were failing, he plunged from a mirror right behind him, aiming a long needle precisely at the back of his neck. Naruto remained motionless. Using the same smooth control Yagura had just taught him in the swamp, he directed his dense chakra into the soles of his bare feet. He slid backward beneath the enemy's blow, riding the thin covering of ice rather than bracing against the frozen concrete. Naruto turned violently as the masked ninja missed the deadly blow and soared above him. He struck the assailant in the face with a vicious, crushing hook. Crack. The dome reverberated with the horrible sound of china breaking. The blow's sheer force sent the masked ninja backward, sending him flying across the ice and colliding with a mirror's base. The shattered mosque's white pieces clattered against the stone. With his golden eyes fixed on the adversary, Naruto lowered his fist. The face was recognizable, but the dark green suit was unfamiliar. Delicate, pale features were framed by long, dark hair. Naruto's blow caused a tiny trail of blood to run down the boy's chin. The hefty chain hovered in the air behind him as Naruto froze. The swamp weed picker. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Haku looked up. Glancing past the golden chains, he saw the scarred face and the red hair, and his dark eyes opened in absolute horror. For the first time, Haku's voice trembled as he said, "You, the boy from the dark." The white fog was completely blinding 100 yards along the bridge. With his silver hair stuck to his forehead from perspiration, Kakashi Hitaki fell backward across the concrete. His only apparent eyes scanned the dense mist as he raised a kunai. Zabuza Momochi was laughing somewhere in the white emptiness, a deep, reverberating sound that seemed to emerge simultaneously from all sides. Zabuza yelled, "You can't protect the bridge builder and fight me, Kakashi," loudly. "You're slipping. Your genin are already dead inside my partner's ice." Kakashi shifted his weight and clenched his teeth. Before he could bite his thumb, the mist between him and the bridge builder abruptly split, preventing him from calling forth his ninkin to follow the smell of blood. A tiny figure in a gray traveling robe emerged from the white emptiness. Kakashi tightened up instantly and lifted his kunai. However, the figure refrained from attacking. The youngster reached up and carefully drew down his hood, exposing a pallid face with startling pinkish-purple eyes and a stitch scar down his cheek. The enormous shadow of the executioner's blade crashed down from the thick fog above, right on Kakashi's neck. The boy wearing the gray cloak didn't even raise his head. He held up one hand nonchalantly. With a resounding smash, the enormous iron blade was struck by a towering, dense wall of solid water that burst from the concrete. Zabuza's muscles stiffened as he hit the ground, landing a few yards away. However, Zabuza's gaze focused on the boy's face as the mist swirled about the newcomer. The demon of the hidden mist became motionless. In his hands, the enormous sword dipped slightly. "You." Zabuza growled, his voice turning into a menacing hiss. "You're supposed to be rotting in the capital. What are you doing here, tyrant?" Kakashi's one eye became wide with complete disbelief. He had known that face for more than 10 years from bingo books. He glanced at Zabuza's response before turning back to the boy who was standing composedly between them. "The fourth Mizukage?" Kakashi asked, gripping his kunai more tightly. He was totally out of his element. It was one thing to have a missing nin. It was a geopolitical nightmare to see a cage standing on a bridge in the land of waves. With his pale eyes fixed solely on the renegade swordsman, Yagura released the water wall. "I am no longer the Mizukage, Zabuza," Yagura said. The hardened mercenary was completely unnerved by the heavy, genuine anguish in his voice. The illusion was broken. "I have finally seen the blood mist for what it truly was." With a sneer, Zabuza repositioned the executioner's blade. His arms were bulging with veins. "Do you expect me to care? You slaughtered my comrades. You turned our home into a graveyard. I tried to cut your head off once, Yagura. I don't mind finishing the job today." Yagura said, "I know," and moved on, completely ignoring Kakashi. "I came to see the damage I caused. I came to face you." Zabuza acted without hesitation. With a howl of rage, He charged forward and swung the enormous sword in a deadly, horizontal arc that was targeted squarely for Yagura's midsection. With a curse beneath his breath, Kakashi entered the battle and turned the bridge assassination attempt into a bloody, chaotic three-way conflict.